Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Bump Podcast, a place for the believers of the unexplained, monsters, and paranormal. Join us, and we'll go face to face with what goes bump in the night.
Hey there, believers. I got a great episode for you this week. Today, I'm bringing on Carlos, and he's going to talk to us about his experience with, his experience with a Bigfoot creature, and there's a whole lot more to it than that. He feels led by the Lord to share his testimony, and I don't want to step on his story at all. But if you have an experience you'd like to share, just holler at me at thebumppodcast@gmail.com. And I just want to thank everybody for all the support with the books, and I hope your New Year's going well. I don't want to waste any more time, so let's go ahead and just bring him on now. Carlos, thank you so much, brother, for joining me today.
Yeah, right on, Bo. Yeah, kind of like how we were saying, really overall, I just want listeners to know that this story is about how good God is,
Amen.
and how He really does have a plan for all of us. There was a time where I didn't even understand that, didn't want to understand that, and since then, Jesus has been working through me to really allow me to hear and to see, and yeah, and so really, I think my story starts when uh before I was born, my parents had my older sister and my late sister who passed away when she was 2 years old. Um, yeah, it was always one of those stories I heard growing up, about this tragic accident that happened. And my older sister, she was actually a witness to this. My sister had gotten hit by a bus when she was 2 years old, and on her bicycle, on her tricycle, I guess. And this was just like the main story I kind of heard my whole life about my sister, and kind of how it changed my parents' lives. Essentially, this accident happens, and my parents, who were young parents, I think my mom had her first kid when she was about 16, my dad was about 17. And I'm first generation American. My parents were both from Mexico. And my mom, I think a little bit more was kind of I think grew up a little bit more in the States, but by this time, but my dad and her met, and were starting their family young. Uh, and kind of leading up to this accident, my mom, and just from other stories, she's always had sensitivity to kind of supernatural things. And so she was telling me that she kind of had dreams about a priest that she had never met before, kind of standing next to a monk that she had never met before, and these dreams kind of kept popping up. And so the day of the story, my parents are out to kind of like a late lunch, early dinner, with my uncles and aunt, and they had a babysitter. The babysitter falls asleep, and the my sister and my two older sisters, they leave the house, get on their tricycles, and they're riding around out front. And apparently, like, there was like a little slope driveway, and they go down, and my younger or my the younger, the older sister who got hit, couldn't get up the edge of the driveway. And there's a school bus coming, apparently doesn't see, and hits my sister. And at that time, my mom and dad are at their dinner, and my mom immediately feels that something's wrong, gets up, doesn't know what's going on, drives back home. As they get to the house, there's ambulance, there's commotion, and right away it's just tragic, right? Like, as a father now, as a parent now, I can only imagine the the pain, and the confusion, everything. And so, long story short, a lot of this all happens, and my mom's in a complete mess. She ends up seeing the monk and the priest that she had been dreaming about the day of the funeral. She had never met, and this is who the Catholic kind of service that they had provided this priest and monk, and there they are, uh, giving the kind of doing the service for the funeral. And so this leads, my mom, this is like about a day after, they're my mom's just a complete wreck and she's wailing, and I've never experienced this, but from what I heard is wailing is just like a different type of crying. It's, uncontrollable wailing of the soul, your soul's crying, and my grandma and aunts and stuff are escorting her to her bed, and my mom is like is, so hurt, and she's starting to calm down, kind of drifting into sleep, and she has a sensation, where all of a sudden she feels warmth all around her body because she's begging for relief. She's asking God and trying to get, some kind of answer as to how this could happen, why this happened. And all of a sudden, she's feeling warmth all around her body and she sees a light. And she says the light is like a light that you can't define. There's no words to really express it. And all she heard was that she's gonna be okay. She's with me now, and you're gonna be okay. And my
Wow,
mom says from in that moment she knew exactly who she was talking to, knew exactly who it was, and it was Jesus Christ.
man,
Um,
that gave me chills all the way up my back and arms, man.
right. And
Uh,
I just heard this testimony. I just had asked her maybe a month ago because, I believe there's just so much power in people's testimonies, and I
yes,
feel like if I would have heard more in my life, like as a young person, it probably would have helped a lot, to really guide me. And yeah, so my mom is a Catholic at this time, and Jesus presents himself to her and comforts
amen,
her and during a time of uncontrollable, emotion and turmoil. And so my mom becomes, a believer, and she leaves the Catholic Church and starts, and by God's will, provides like kind of like she finds like a study group that's kind of out of a garage, and
hmm,
they're studying the Bible and talking more about Jesus. She's on fire for Jesus at this point, and my dad, he's I think it's interesting because God, has a plan for everyone separately, but my dad is kind of going through his own time and eventually comes around. They had found a church, and in the same thing, I asked my dad recently about his testimony, and it was about the same time, obviously, because they're a complete mess.
right,
And he said that he goes to his testimony was that he goes to the service, they're doing prayer at the front, and he feels the call to go up and let, the worship team pray for him. And while they're praying for him, the same thing, he feels, he hears, right? He
yeah,
hears the message and just feels comforted, and right away just believed in Jesus. It wasn't, I think he was maybe holding back a little bit more on telling me more about how he felt about it, but my mom, I think it was just incredible to hear her story about how she was just felt the warmth, and saw a light and heard a voice, and it's incredible. So at this time, my I'm this happened in 87, I believe. So it's about my mom is also at this time connecting with Jesus and connecting with God and really asking, still in a lot of pain, as much as she got comforted that day, she wasn't completely healed, but was
right,
asking for a, a child, right? Asking and praying to God, and really wanted a boy, as the story goes. And my mom is pleading with God and saying, please, you know, give me another child. And I really, and this time, let it be a boy. And
right.
and referring to me and says, this child will be yours. This child will be, it will be already surrendering me in the womb and before conception. And my mom says about a year later, she's pregnant and here I am. And so, uh, which was incredible to hear as a like again as I'm a parent, because it's very important to surrender your children to Jesus, and to spiritually protect them as much as you can.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that made me feel very thankful and grateful to my mom for doing that. And just then I'm born, and she even mentioned went along to mention that I got to play baby Jesus, in their church, that I was selected out of a couple families, and that apparently I aced the role, and I was just a perfect, calm as a cucumber, and just kind of moving my hands around in the manger to really to play the part. And I just was like, no way, like I got to play baby Jesus. That's
That
pretty cool, I don't know
is
too
cool.
many people. So just things like that. However, my parents eventually end up struggling because of this. They lost a child. They both are drifting, even though they have now found Christ. They're struggling in their marriage, and they end up getting a divorce. They tried to buy a home. I'm about 2 months, and I think it's when they call it quits. However, leading up to this, there's this house that I kind of grew up in when I would go visit my dad, and a couple of supernatural things happened in this house to not only me but to my mom and my sister. And so the my mom says that, as she was packing things up because the marriage is getting finalized, my dad has a restraining order for whatever which reason at this point, and she has, kind of a court mandated time to go into the house, gather her things, and kind of get out. And so she says that she's in there with her friend, uh, and they're in the master bedroom, which is kind of in the far back of the house, and they hear someone come in into the home. And right away they're like, oh, it's, they're thinking it's my dad and that he shouldn't be there. And, it could get confrontational.
Right.
And, they start kind of to like panic because at this point, there's a restraining order for things that happen. And so I think my mom is panicking and kind of like, oh gosh. And so they start hearing footsteps come, it was like a long hallway to the master bedroom, and they hear footsteps, and they're kind of like calling out, my dad's name. They're kind of calling out, no one's answering anything, and they start to panic so much that they leave the room through like a little small window that was above the bed, and they kind of crawl out of there and run around and go to the neighbor's house to call the cops because someone's in the house. They're not making themselves known. It's no one they know. No one should be there. Um, And when they're waiting across the street at the neighbor's house, the cops come in, they go search the house. No one's in the house. And my mom has always been like, she's like, she's like, at first I thought it was your dad, but as I heard the footsteps and started to like she felt dread. She felt darkness. She felt scared and knew that it was something supernatural, essentially something, the enemy, essentially.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was like the story that I kind of grew up hearing, about my mom's kind of sensitivity with, her dreams about the priest and the monk, but also that dream there, or not that experience that she had there with someone being in the house. Um, my sister also has a story that she had like kind of around the same time. She had a friend from church like kind of spending the night because my sister's 6 years older than me, so she was already kind of like a kid, a toddler, if anything,
Right.
almost 7 years old. And they're spending the night, and they kind of the same thing, felt dread, and kind of look. They have like a little nightlight, and in the nightlight kind of silhouette, they see an image of a black cat, and it's kind of moving. Um, and they're both kind of like, oh my gosh, look, 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 and like they get so scared because I think this feeling of dread overcame them, and they run to go get my mom. My mom comes in, and it's gone, right? There's just a night light there, which I've kind of heard a couple times about black cats, silhouettes, those types of things,
Yeah, man.
but kind of really never, to me, I was just like, well, that's a crazy story. So yeah, fast forward a little bit. I'm a little older. My parents are divorced. I would go back and forth, sometimes to see my dad, and I'm about like four, maybe 3 or 4 at this time, and it, I'm thinking more 4 or 5 actually, and I'm playing around the pool. This house had a pool, but this time it was empty. And so I'm like playing around it. Already kind of a bad idea. I don't know how I was out there, kind of playing around an empty pool, but I had this sensation like where I'm playing around the pool and it just felt like next thing I know, I've been pushed and I
Mm.
fell down the deep end of this pool and fell right on my stomach. I remember like just next thing I know, I'm in the bottom of this pool and there's like a little puddle built up down there. There's like pieces of wood, just kind of like random pieces of yard and stuff like that in there.
Right.
And I'm kind of thinking like, and I'm a young kid, so I'm thinking I, I know no one's up there, but I felt pushed and I felt like I'm also protected though. There's not a scratch on me. It felt like I could have, no broken bones. There's nothing. And so I'm kind of like crawling my way out and I'm crying out to my dad. And I remember my dad and my sister come out and they just get me out. But at this point, I was already halfway crawling up to, the waiting area. So my dad's like, "Oh, you fell like it's only like 4 feet," like kind of almost making like making it a joke, kind of like, "Oh, you didn't fall too hard, you just got scared." And I'm
Right.
trying to tell him like, "No, I fell in the deep end, like I don't know how, and even as a young kid, I'm thinking, how am I not more hurt? Like there's not no blood, no nothing. And the way I fell though, if like I remember I felt like I hit my mouth area, nothing. So I was just kind of, thinking now, I bring this up only because it's been such a core memory for me. And I was thinking like it felt like I got pushed, but yet something softened my fall, right? Like something came and like made sure I wasn't completely hurt. Uh, it could just, be nothing, but at this point, Bo, I just don't believe in coincidences. I
No,
don't
no,
think
that wasn't
that,
nothing, man. That wasn't
yeah,
nothing for sure.
right. And so, this is about the same time, this next story, I'm in the kitchen in like like a kid. I want cereal. I go, there's a brand new box, and I grab a knife, and I'm using this steak knife to open the bag of cereal. And the way I'm doing it is probably the most sketchiest way you could open a bag of cereal, right? I'm just stabbing it and then like pulling with the blade, gonna come towards me. And it does. It flies all the way. The point of the knife hits me pretty much. I don't know what this area of the face is called, but like between where my nose meets the bridge of my eye, and
Yeah.
the way it felt, it was like, oh, I stabbed myself. There's a point. I go and I'm like, run like in this house, there was big mirrors everywhere, kind of like that was kind of the ambiance. And I run to one of the mirrors and I'm expecting like blood, and there's nothing there. And I felt this blade go into my skin, into my eye area. Like it didn't make any sense. And once again, as a young kid, I'm even thinking like, how is this possible? But you're a young kid, and then I'm like, well, I'm not gonna tell my dad that this happened because he's gonna be like, what were you doing opening a knife with, opening a bag of cereal with a knife, and they didn't want to get in trouble. So I
Dude,
mean, those are a little bit of, or what's that?
yeah, you could have lost your eye, but you didn't even leave a mark. That's like that's God's hand on you. Like I
Right.
love that.
Yeah.
It's not a little thing. These are there's no such thing as a little miracle. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
miraculous. It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, I bring these stories up because something was happening in this home. I think the enemy was aware of the situation with my parents, knew that we were vulnerable, knew that, when you're part of a divorce, broken kind of home, uh, things were happening, and I think the enemy knew that. But I also believe now that because my mom surrendered me in such a way and prayed and kind of pleaded with God that if I was to be born, that I was his, really plays a big part into like my life because like those moments there, I've always remembered them. They've always stuck out, and I think, when I used to think about these things, I was like, oh, that's because they're just kind of these traumatic things that kind of happen that I can't explain. But as of late, I think God's been like, no, that was me. I protected your fall. I protected your face when the knife came,
Yes.
and also showing me like, oh no, but the enemy was also there with the story with your mom. That was the enemy, and the story with my sister and the cat and the dread, right? Because with my situations, there wasn't no scary feelings. These were like miraculous, kind of like whoa. And each time I kind of felt that as a kid, like something should have been worse, but it wasn't, and kind of confused. Um, so yeah, that kind of happened. So then my upbringing, things start to change. I'm getting older. Uh, Both my mom and dad have found another partner who they're now with, my stepdad, my stepmom, and, I have half brothers on each side, and, they're kind of growing. But once again, my sister and I are kind of are the ones struggling with the fact that both our parents are split up, and therefore we have these step parents who really aren't our parents, and we're back and forth. And my sister is 6 years older than me, so then she's has a different perspective on what's happening, and I'm also now experiencing something that I can't really understand, but and I think it leads to overall identity issues,
Mm-hmm.
where I truly for the longest time I dealt with daddy issues, right? Like
Yeah.
there's why did my dad leave? Why did he? I'm a junior. My name is Carlos after him, and 2 months later he's gone, right? And I never understood like why would you do that? Like if you weren't planning on as a dad. But, you know, God's allowed me to like understand and forgive a lot of those things, right? And so, but yeah, like I think overall, my sister and I both struggle with identity. Who are we? Where do we belong? Who are our parents? And at this time too, I think our parents were trying to start their new relationships, trying to make sure these ones lasted, and therefore I don't want to say we were on the back burner, but there was times where we were bouncing around. I was living with my grandma, or my sister was living with my aunt, things like that where I think my parents were just trying to make it work, and sometimes they just needed help as single parents or as best they could, now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, I ended up, my mom was originally, I was born in Vegas, so this house is in Vegas, Nevada. Uh, but my mom, after the divorce, ends up moving back to kind of the valley of California, this town of Modesto, kind of outskirts, and my dad's still in Vegas, so that's where we're bouncing back and forth from. Um, and so at this time, I'm growing up going to my grandma's church, which is an apostolic church. And my grandparents were really tied into the community there. My grandpa was the guitar player for the worship team, and just these were people that I was like, man, these are saints of people, right? Like these were the closest people that I had in my life that were the closest to God, and just they were my grandparents. These were people that could do no wrong, and these were my mom's parents. And then my dad was also a drummer. So when I would go see him, he was part of a Pentecostal church and he was a drummer. So it was
Wow.
kind of this really cool experience where I did grow up in churches, right?
Right.
And as I grow up, you're a kid, you're kind of running around or going to Sunday school and stuff like that. But as I'm kind of learning these two different branches of Christianity a little bit, but never really understanding what it is, right? I kind of understood that God was God, but I don't really remember anyone really breaking down who Jesus was, kind of helping me really understand the importance and the power in the name, or you know what I mean? It was just kind of like a lot of I always felt fearful. It was always like, oh, if there's right and wrong, and if you do wrong, you're going to hell, and if you do good, you're going to heaven. And as a kid, you kind of get stuck in these things. Um, and I have, just these memories of like where I was starting to think like, when did I start to stray away, right? Why wasn't I? When did it start to get challenging to like to accept these, to accept God and to accept this, right? Like, why was I a non-believer? And there's these other core memories I have where I remember we're watching one of the older Jesus movies. I think the one from like the 60s or 70s. I can't remember which one exactly, but the crucifixion part's coming up, and I remember I'm in tears, right? I mean, I'm empathetic. I'm seeing this happen, and I'm feeling this, the actor's pain, the story. I'm feeling the story, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I remember coming to my mom and wanting to comfort and understand why this happened to this person, and I get slapped in the face for interrupting the the vibe, for and get sent to my room. And I just remember being in my room and kind of, this is one of the first times where I remember thinking like, this isn't fair. My life, this isn't fair. I don't understand, and kind of, once again, like, you're a kid, I just couldn't imagine me trying to, we're, as a family, you're trying to show the story of Jesus, and your kids are feeling it, and you think of that as an inconvenience, and you send them to their room, to kind of deal with it. And
Right.
so I remember just being like, kind of going through that. And the same with my dad. There's, he sat me down one time and was like, you got it. The moment you start to understand good and evil, you got to make a choice. And I remember I was in third grade and I'm having nightmares about hell, and I'm coming to his room every night, asking him to pray with me, and it's an inconvenience. Go back to your room, kind of just, not, and it's not like a, hey, let me give you some attention real quick and let's pray. It was just more like, go to your room, stop crying, get over it. And so I think, when people talk about church hurt, I think it's a little bit of that, that kind of comes into it, because also at churches and stuff, like, I remember just bouncing around, or you're a kid and you see kind of, you see people break character, and then hypocrisy comes up, and you're kind of like, oh, wait, okay, what's going on? So I'm starting to get older and older, right? I'm becoming a teenager. And at this point, my dad had started going to another Pentecostal church, and this is the first time I'm seeing people speak in tongues and jump around, and really, like, essentially people are moving the chairs in the sanctuary to allow these people to feel the spirit. And right away, I'm doubtful. I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is wrong.
Right.
This is bogus, right? This is fake. And I'm seeing it, and sometimes I'm seeing the same people do it over and over again every time I'm there. My dad's playing drums, so it's like he's, you know, I think, not really able to like help me as I'm in the sanctuary observing all this. And I remember one time there was this younger kid. He was about a year younger than me. I must be like 12 or 13, and he does it. And so after church, I go up to him and I'm like, "Hey, like, what happened?" Like, trying to get an understanding of what it was. And he's just like, "Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened."
Hmm.
And can't really tell me what. And but these, they're speaking in tongues. They're moving their tongue around, and it sounds foreign. And I'm like, what is this? And so I was very doubtful, and when there was no translator, there was no way to really understand what was happening, and this was just something that happened over and over again. And I started to get really reluctant and kind of, I don't know, I just was confused and I didn't understand it, right? Uh, and then then I would go back home, and at the apostolic church, we're all getting older, and I'm playing. My grandpa gives me my first guitar, and I'm really stoked. But I'm also into secular music, so I'm playing not worship music at all, and
Right.
and I'm getting a lot of negative feedback about that from my grandma, who my grandpa gave me my first guitar, and she's like, you shouldn't be playing anything like that. That on this guitar that your grandpa gave you, you should be, singing for the Lord. And absolutely right. But as a kid, you're just kind of like, well, I don't know. Like, right, there was no teaching there. It's just more like negative feedback. And so I start to feel isolated again, right? You start to feel like, okay, well, I don't know any of these songs. I'm not feeling connected. And a lot of rules. I feel like with my in this, I'm not saying that Pentecostals or apostolics are this way in every single congregation, but it just was my perspective from what I saw growing up in it. I started to just feel like there was a lot of hypocrisy and not enough consistency with both of them, so I had a lot of questions, and I think me bouncing back and forth wasn't really helping. Um, but one thing my mom did do was she sat me down one time and she was like, "Hey, I need you to learn Psalm 23." And I remember her giving me her Bible, and every night for about a month, 2 weeks, we just read it and until I memorized it. And it always was one of those things where she was like, if you're ever fearful, if you're ever confused, if just read this, say it out loud, and God will listen. And so for a long time, I did use that, and I still, I think to this very day, if I just need something when I'm not praying directly, like just to say a psalm, I will. And so I really appreciate my mom doing that because it really
Absolutely.
did always comfort me, I think, to some extent, um, which was good. Um, Let me see. So I started to grow up, and at this point too, I kind of stopped going to my dad's house. I was kind of getting to that point where I just wanted to be around my friends. I think I'm about an eighth, freshman, kind of, that early teens, and I just want to hang out. I'm skateboarding, I'm playing electric guitar. All I want to do is be in a rock and roll band and play my favorite music, but at this time too, my mom is struggling with alcohol, and she's not at the time too, you're not as a kid when you're kind of skateboarding and playing guitar and like you're not really too focused on what's going on.
Right.
And I forgot to mention once my mom and stepdad had really committed to one another, we ended up moving to Dallas, Texas because he had gotten a job out there. So about from 99 to 2003 we were in Dallas. And so as I'm becoming a
Wow.
teenager, that's where I'm living. And
Right.
one day they tell me like, "Oh, we're moving back to California," and I'm about a month in my sophomore year, and I'm
That's a
kind of
tough
like,
age to
what?
move, man.
Yeah, and and at this time, Bo, I was already used, like we had moved many times within Dallas, within the state of Texas, so I want to say this was probably going to be my 12th time being at a different school,
Wow.
and at this stage, from bouncing back and forth from my dad. There was a time where I lived with my dad in third grade, and then sixth grade. So, just a bunch of schools was kind of at this point used to being the new kid, but at 15 and sophomore, I was like, no, I don't want to go. My life is here. My friends are here. Why?
Right.
It wasn't a, it wasn't a discussion. It was a, hey, this is happening. So start prepping yourself for that. And so I think when we moved to the Sacramento area, my mom really took it pretty bad. I think she had left her life out there too, her friends, and it was just one of those things where everyone was bumming out about it. And my mom, this is when I started to notice that the problem was very apparent. Like I would come home. Well, I remember my first day of high school in Sacramento. She was like, "Oh, I'll pick you up," and I waited out there for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'm like, "Okay, I guess I'll walk to the apartment that we lived at with all my
Right.
books and everything that I had from that first day." And I get there and she's in her room, door locked, and I'm just kind of like, no follow up, no nothing. It was just kind of like, oh snap, and I start to notice then, and I started to kind of build my identity on like I'm gonna be straight edge. Alcohol
Hmm.
is weak. This is annoying. This is angering me, right? Like it's like if this is what drinking alcohol is, I don't want nothing to do with it.
Right.
And so for a long time, from I think 15 to 17, I was very on that and just wanted to play guitar, wanted to play music. And therefore my friends, I also needed them to not be about partying and stuff like that. And we weren't for the most part. And so this leads me to like I think my junior year, senior year time. This is gonna sound kind of corny, but as I'm reflecting now, I think this is kind of where I start opening myself up really to the enemy to really
Mm.
give him permission. If we're talking about like contracts of spiritual warfare, I think this is because the more and more I think about it, I'm like something happened and it was too quick to like put my finger on and I don't know what. But essentially I had made, I'm like a kid, a teenager, and I'm kind of talking out loud one day in my room and I'm like, if I can have a girlfriend and all these things, I'll be happy and I promise I'll do this, that, and the other, right? And I don't know what that was. I don't know what I had to do in regards, but it was I made a deal with something that day, and I ended up getting a girlfriend. We end up having, this is the first time I'm feeling love, feeling something for someone else. Everything's going good, and then, you know, uh, something happens where I get hurt, and I'm feeling hurt and pain, and I'm like struggling with that, and I don't have my dad at this point, right? This is all back to like daddy issues, like kind of like who do I talk to about this? My mom
Mm-hmm.
is drinking, I can't talk to her. I'm going through this kind of like a breakup scenario, and we end up getting back together, but I'm already the pain is there, the hurt has been done, and I'm thinking, and then one day it's as if I broke the deal, and something over me is like, you're gonna call your girlfriend, you're gonna break up with her over the phone, and you're gonna now drink and start going to parties, and you're gonna enjoy your senior year, and you're gonna become the cool kid. This was like the other part of this agreement that I didn't realize was part of it. And then, like I said, once, like, I think to people listening, this isn't something that I'm like, oh, it's just, these sound like teenage issues, right? But this is how, now reflecting that I'm thinking about it, because this is really where my life starts to go dark, and I I still don't understand why I broke it off over the phone, and then, yeah, literally the next day I'm going to parties on the weekends. We're literally going to like the local grocery store, running in to steal alcohol to come out, drinking, rum, or I don't even know what to drink at this point, but it's just like I just went that way, and I started to, and at this point my mom had become conscious of her alcohol. Her and my stepdad had gone through, discussions where she needed to change her behavior. And so now that she's kind of getting clean and getting sober, I'm now like
Right.
drinking and smoking and starting to do all these things and starting to be, a problem. And so because my stepdad was my stepdad, a lot of the communication went through my mom. So it was always also very, uh, cumbersome. It was like this isn't gonna fly for too much longer, and a lot of ultimatums, and then or I would just not come home on the weekends because what's the point? I'm just gonna get yelled at and whatever. And so I end up becoming, a popular kid, and I would say my high school experience was actually pretty cool, right? From a secular worldview, it was like, okay, yeah, awesome. But I started to realize once I'm almost graduated, we're about 2 months from graduating, people are getting accepted into college, people are going to leave, and I have nothing to show for it, right? I have only partying and drinking and smoking on my calendar, right? And
Right.
I barely graduated high school at this time, because I don't care anymore. I'm just kind of doing all this stuff, and so I ended up graduating. I remember, just kind of doing the bare minimum. I wasn't set up for success. I didn't set myself up to think about the future. And, every day I'm just kind of drinking. I ended up moving back to Dallas because my sister ended up staying there when we moved. She was 6 years older, so she was already kind of had her life as a young adult. And so she was still there. I ended up moving back, and right away I just want to find the people to drink with, the people to party with. And she's at this point trying to kind of guide me, right? And I'm not willing to listen to her. I'm like, I didn't come out here for a second mom. Um, and I ended up moving out, only lasted about 6 months on my own before I realized I have to go back to my parents' house. And I remember my mom was like, "Okay, you're gonna, I'll buy you a Greyhound ticket." And that was a 2-day Greyhound experience from Dallas to Sacramento, and a lot of like growing up there as well. Just
Yeah,
like,
man.
man, this is pretty tough. And so I get back, and my parents give me like a 2 week, like, you need to get a job, you need to start doing something. We're not just going to allow you to be here, and I'm kind of like very just kind of going through it. I'm like 19 at this point, and I remember this one night, uh, it's the previous year summer, so a lot of my friends who had gone to college, they're all back home, and I end up this was a day like I ended up taking mushrooms and I'm drinking and it's the end of the night and I run into one of my good friends, who had moved to San Francisco, and we were catching up at this party, and he's like, "Yeah, well, I'm leaving on Monday to go work at this summer camp for people with special needs in Santa Cruz area, and I'm kind of like, I could do that. I kind of like, I'm post mushroom trip drinking, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, I have nothing going on. Like, he's like, yeah, you should, apply, you should come. And I woke up the next day not motivated to apply to do anything, but I end up meeting up with him again, and he's like, hey, dude, let's fill it out. Let's fill out your application. I do. We party again that night. I wake up the next day, and he's like, dude, just come with me to the orientation. He's like, it'll be like five, it'll be a couple hours, and then we'll go down to the beach in Santa Cruz, and we'll like, we'll hang out, we'll do something fun. So I'm like, all right, sure. We go, and essentially we get to the summer camp, and I learned that it's like a week long orientation for my friend. And
Wow.
they're like, who are you? Like, well, like, where are you coming from? Like, and fortunately, they had space. So they're like, do you want a job? This is a summer camp where people with special needs are going to come and actually spend the night. And at this point, I had no idea what autism was. I had no idea what
Right.
Down syndrome was. I was not qualified to be here, but these people were willing to give me a job and to learn. And really, the whole focus of the camp was just recreation. So it was like, we just want these people to have a great time when they're here. We're going to train you this whole week on what to expect, how to, what the protocols and stuff are. I literally had nothing going on. I remember I called my mom and I was just like, I'm not coming home. And to her, she's just like, again, you're not coming home? Like, oh my, like, she doesn't understand that. She probably thinks I'm lying about this
Right.
job. So this is definitely one of those directional times in my life where I realized, like, man, this is something I could actually do. I'm actually naturally good at this. This is fun. I started to understand that there was people out in the world that had it worse than I did, that
Amen,
really
man.
had some issues and some problems and they had some of the best outlooks on the world, and on life, and it was inspiring, nonetheless. I learned a lot that summer, and then I met people from all around the world. I met people from all around the states, and met people that, I met my wife that year, and that was in
Wow.
2008. And just people that I felt like God was like, this is where you need to be, so to start the direction I'm going to lead you in. However, it didn't stop the drinking. We worked pretty hard because it was a 24/7 kind of, they would be there for 7 days. You're kind of sleeping and living with these people,
Right.
and then you would have a day off, but you would have to come back. And so it was like, I couldn't really afford, but when the weekends between the sessions were happening, like, I was gonna party, and so I did that, and I was very cynical. I think I was more insecure because I was meeting people that had qualifications, people that, were 25, 26, older. I was just trying to be cool. Once again, that's all I knew, was to pretend and to fit in with the world, and I wanted to be liked. However, I was hurt, and because of my life, I didn't feel like people didn't really know who I was. So I was putting on this facade of a person, and then that gets exhausting, right? That gets kind of hard to keep up with. And I would drink, and then the enemy, I think, would show himself through that. And I was not like, there was times I think I could say, sure, I was a good drunk, and I was having fun, but there was definitely times where it wasn't fun, and it wasn't bad, and it was bad. And I would wake up with that guilty feeling of like, oh man, like, I have to go apologize or face this, right? I have to face the music now after the decisions I made. Oh, too many times like that. And however, I think for the most part, every every year I end up going back for 3 years every summer, and each time I got closer and closer to being a better person, and I end up like realizing that I'm gonna move to San Francisco. My buddy who got me the job there, we've been friends since high school. We're really good friends now. A lot of other good friends that I've made at this camp are there, so it's like okay. And I moved there when I'm 19, and I realized I'm also, or I didn't realize, but I'm moving to the most expensive city in the in the United States at this point,
Yeah.
and super pricey. And that kind of also helped me stay on the straight and narrow for a little bit, because I had to make sure I was going to pay rent. I was so motivated to be living there with all my friends and to start my life that that was enough for me to go to work, to really strive, to really work hard and pay the bills and stuff like that. Um, and so yeah, I started going there, and I get very lucky and I meet some local people that grew up in the city, and they kind of take me into their friend group, and they were all making music, and I was already really into music, and kind of had gone off and on, but they're doing hip hop and talking about some poetic stuff. I'm starting to understand, like, and these are people who are of Latino culture,
Right.
and I'm like, oh wow, these are the people I've been kind of looking for in my life. They know my struggle. They know the things that I don't have to like explain, and but we're also making music, and we could talk about political stuff, and we could talk about who we are and how we think, and it really opened my eyes to that, and I got inspired, and I really, some of those guys were really good friends, but they had all gone to like private Catholic schools, and so they were really jaded on God and
Right.
religion. They thought it was religion, and they were, and that really fit who I was at the time because my foundation was weak, right? I was just like, yeah, dude, like all that stuff was bogus. Everything I knew growing up, it was fake. My parents are hypocrites because, yeah, like so we were all able to kind of bond on that, the fact that we were searching for answers and we are going to find it through each other and through the world and through drinking and through being open-minded, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then one of my buddies from Texas, when I moved back for that 6 months, actually ends up moving us to San Francisco. One day on Facebook, I see him posted at the beach, and I'm like, "Oh wait, what are you doing here?" Like, and we catch up, and he ends up being
Right.
we end up bonding and stuff like that. But this buddy, he was the first friend that I had that kind of started talking to me about conspiracy stuff. And he would bring up 9/11. I think at that time he was into Alex Jones, things like that, that I was kind of like, I didn't know what he was talking about, but I would listen to him, and I would sometimes be like, dude, you're full of it. Like, I was not buying into it. Like I knew at this point, I kind of thought everything I learned in history class was the truth
Right.
at this point, right? I was like, oh,
Yeah.
dude, what are you talking about? Like, why would this, like, 9/11, like, and he would break certain things down that I wasn't really prepared to really hear, and I would kind of, when it became overwhelming, I just would tune out. But he was always that friend for me, and then I started to kind of pick up like with my other buddies who we were making music, like they started kind of bringing up new age stuff, and one of them was really into astral projecting, and it was like, oh dude, you can astral project and you can fly and all this stuff, and I remember him telling me it, and right away I had this feeling of like, I'm not doing that.
Right.
I
Right.
I got very fearful. I got very like, whoa, you guys are like, I didn't know what it was that he was talking about, other than the title astral projecting. But when he explained what it was and how it felt, and all, I was just kind of like, that doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound like something I want to do or even want to remotely try. And but there was a moment where all the homies were doing that, right? Like they were all trying to kind of get spiritual in that aspect and really
Yeah, bro.
figure that part out. And so, kind of these two worlds were kind of linking up where it was like new age and conspiracy start to like kind of align and I think this starts to happen a bit when you are looking. I mean, at least for me, it started to happen when I was searching for answers, like because I always knew I was spiritual. I just didn't know that there was a war happening about it, right? I didn't
Right.
realize that there was that I didn't think of it that it was actually real. I almost felt like it was just me and I was somehow different in this aspect because I was like, I'm thinking about, I want to have deep conversations with people. I want to learn everyone's traditions. I want to like, and once again, it all comes back to my identity, right? I didn't know who I was, so I was so open to finding out who is this person and or who am I? How do I fit in here? And one of my good friends from the homies that did music, he was Mexican, but his mom's side, they did a great job of like preserving his indigenous culture. And they, you know,
Mm.
he was indigenous from the lands of like the Ohlone lands, which was ancient San Francisco area, kind of the Bay Area. And, you know, his family had done a great job of recording certain things and keeping things through the family and like kind of he knew that. And so he was the first person that said, "Hey, you're not Mexican, you're indigenous." Like, you know, the Spanish came over and they colonized you know, the Americas and we're all here now, but you were someone else. And it really resonated with me, right? I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this is what I've been looking for. This is who I am." This makes so much sense because I mean, my name was Carlos Perez. My parents were divorced. I grew up in the United States, and like I still went through my own discrimination, like adversity, but yet was trying so hard to be an American, and that's who I am. But it
Right.
wasn't always adding up. So why was it so hard if this is who I am? Like, oh, this makes more sense. I'm indigenous, and even my own culture try to hide it from me, right? And all these like things, right? The enemy is very like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, perfect, right? Like, yeah, this
Oh
is who
yeah,
you
for
are.
sure.
Yeah. And so for a long time, this is what I started to learn more about who I was. I started to ask my parents where exactly in Mexico they were from, and then would do more research on the indigenous tribes of that area. And really, you know, I learned that my dad's side's from Zacatecas, which is kind of the middle of Mexico, and there was a indigenous tribe called the Chichimeca who were actually never really colonized by the Spaniards and they were known to be warriors and like just they kind of and but it was more like guerrilla warfare because they were so in the middle they kind of knew the lay of the land and just were able to never really fully be conquered at the time. And I took a lot of pride in that. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense because I'm like, you know, that's where I come from and you know
Yep.
and stuff like that, you know. And then my mom's side was from like kind of the East Gulf area and they were called Pura Pecha, and these were like kind of spiritual people. These were definitely people that you know were essentially practicing pagan things, you know, and that also resonated with me. It was like, okay, all this stuff is kind of laying up. I'm a warrior, so that's why I'm kind of like anti-authority, and like this is why my life has always been kind of hard, and but I'm also spiritual, and that makes sense, right? So these are the things I'm starting to align with. I'm starting to practice using sage and palo santo, like these types of incense and stuff like that, and trying to smudge and cleanse, and yeah, you know, and I think at this time all those friends are listening to my buddy and what because he's really in he's kind of the one more well versed in it. So we're all kind of getting inspired by him and really thinking like this is truth. This is the stuff that we didn't want to know. And at that time, you know, as we're all doing research on this, people start to talk about Anunnaki and the Nephilim. And these things start to come up, right? And we're like, because we're all digging so deep into ancient stuff that we're like, oh, we're finding this stuff now. And we're like, and I'm like, whoa, this, you know, and then people would, you know, I remember one of my buddies who was like, "Oh, it's in the Bible even." And when I remember, I was like, "What?" And I'm like, "Whoa!" Like, and then you know, I started to connect more things where I started to almost at this point now have a little bit more respect for the Bible and maybe, oh, maybe they are trying to tell us some stuff, but I just didn't know about that because no one in my family ever talked about supernatural things. They never talked about giants, for example, right? Genesis
Right.
6. They never brought up any of these kind of supernatural things that come. Even the day of Pentecost is a supernatural experience, and my dad belonged to the Pentecostal church, but I never heard it like that. It was just kind of like they never talked about spiritual gifts. They never talked about it, and maybe they did, right? And God just I wasn't able to hear yet, but it just never felt like it did, right? Um, so I'm figuring out who I am, and my buddy Kane, the conspiracy guy. His name is Kane. He said that he always joked and said he was named after the wrestler Kane, and I was always into that idea. But
Yeah.
he ends up kind of going to Machu Picchu and climbing there. He ends up getting really into hiking and backpacking, and he ends up quitting his job at the bank, and he ends up traveling the world, and he starts doing all these amazing backpack, like living on trails, and just disappears off the grid.
Dude,
But
that's the
before he left,
dream. I'll just
right,
be honest. That's the dream, bro.
right. And so yeah, and I remember, leading up to it, I was just like, oh, dude, and I was like, yeah, like you're doing exactly what I want to do. I want to live off the grid. I just want to disappear, right? We're talking about like Call of the Wild, right? Like just go
Yeah.
out and cut up your credit cards, cut up your identity or your identification, and just go figure things out. I get really into camping. I get really into backpacking. And because of my buddy going to Peru, I end up wanting to go because at this point too, with all my research, I'm learning that there's spiritual havens, right? There's
Hmm.
Machu Picchu being one, the pyramids at Giza, the Tibet, these kind of and landlines. I'm getting all this information, but I don't know how to really connect it all. And I end up getting my buddies to we plan a trip to Peru, and I never even gone to Mexico to travel like that, but I ended up going to Peru for 2 months and backpacking around, and
What?
uh, yeah, it was awesome. It was one of those experiences where and once again, like I went there looking for spiritual answers. I couldn't wait to get on top of Machu Picchu, but the moment we get there, you're just immersing yourself in Peruvian culture, and we end up taking this bus line, and we end up in the town of Paracas. And I don't know if you ever heard of the Paracas skulls.
Very much so.
And
Yes. Very
right,
familiar.
and it's so funny because I learned about that maybe a year or two after I had come back. But we're in Paracas, and I remember we're walking around the little downtown. There's a museum, and it's talking about the Star Child skull. And I'm
Yeah,
like, what
man.
is this? We go in, and there was like a paid exhibit that you could go farther, but in the lobby itself, they had the Star Child skull there. And I remember looking at it, and I'm like, what is this? I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is proof aliens exist. The the solar system, all the everything, right? This is something's happening. Aliens
Right.
are real. We're revolving around the sun. All these things are kind of getting, verified there. And I'm like, kind of like, oh man, but I didn't realize like. I wish I would have paid to go deeper into that and see the elongated skulls with the red hair and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
for sure.
But this was just a little beach town, like some of the best food I've ever had, and nothing's really happening here. There's like the hostel, there's like a little strip, that museum, and even the museum is like there's not much going on. Like no one was really in there when I went in there, and so I didn't give it much credit, much time a day or anything. And I yeah, so I go. We end up going south because that's where Cusco is, where you get to Machu Picchu, and we end up at one point in the trip they stop us, and we're at one of the Nazca lines, and there's like this tower, and you can kind of go up to the tower to kind of, and you can only see two. I want to say we were able to see the tree and maybe the monkey, I want to say. And when you look at these things, it's unbelievable. I don't know who created because it's almost like a giant had a hoe and raked the earth to
Yeah.
create these ditches. Like and when you're up on these towers to look at down and see what you're looking at, and even when you're standing at the two-dimensional side of it, it's so hard. Like the dirt is hard packed. Like it just doesn't make sense. Like no machine could do it.
Right. Like you'd
That we
almost have to
had right
be
there.
like in a UFO maybe to look down and see it, right?
Right, right, yeah. And
Yeah,
I'm
bro.
like, and I remember being there, and I'm just like, whoa, like this is serious, right? Like something's happening in Peru, and like we would stop at these little cafes or whatever, and you're looking at the foundations of these buildings, and yeah, you see those stones that are perfectly Tetris together. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'm just kind of like, whoa, this is all making me so much more curious about where we come from, what is happening. Um, I think at this point I'd tapped a little bit into the ancient astronaut theory, which essentially would, I think for the most part, would explain a lot of this stuff. But it was just like some YouTube video that I had seen. It was before Ancient Astronauts even came out, so I was like, oh wow, like okay. When that show came out, I obviously tuned in for a minute, but when you're there at the Nazca lines, when Baraka Skulls, I think God was still there, right? Being like, yeah, I want you to take all this in, like this is
Yep.
part of your, you want this? Okay, you're gonna get it. But now essentially what happens, Bo, is that I'm just too deep into questions and I don't have any answers, right? And so we end up getting, and we did some pretty big hikes and stuff like that while we were there, and it all started very positive and like very fitness based, and like we did Coca Canyon, which is between Coca Canyon and the Grand Canyon. Those two kind of compete every year for the deepest canyon on Earth. But I climbed out of it, and it was one of those things that I'm pretty pumped about to
Yeah,
have been
man.
able to do. Um, and but then we get to Cusco, and Cusco is an amazing little city, man. It's high up in elevation. The culture is rich there with it's you fly into Lima, it's like you see an Applebee's and you're kind of like, whoa, like there's Applebee's in the North Face store. Like what do we I thought I was in Peru. What's happening? But you
Right.
get to Cusco and now you're in Peru. Like there's people dressed up in traditional clothing and just stuff happening everywhere. Bustling little, markets and stuff like that. And of course, you stay at the hostel, and the hostel is where you're going to meet people from everywhere. I remember this year in specific, there was a lot of people from Israel, like a lot of Hebrew, essentially military people that were on. They had done their, I forgot how many years is it, but like everywhere we went, we would meet a couple of people from Israel, and they were all like had just finished up their 2 years, I want to say, of military service, so
2 years.
they
Yeah.
all get like a vacation or something like that.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we were meeting people.
That's wild. They
But
go to
also,
Peru.
yeah, exactly. They're all down there. I
Huh.
mean, especially, I mean, it was there, and a lot of the beach towns they would be there just hanging out. But we would talk to them, and at that time too, I don't know where I got this, but I was under the impression they didn't like us very much, and so I would talk to them more about it, and a lot of them, oh no, we love you guys, and some of them were like, well, yeah, we hate you guys, and like we would be playing beer pong against them, and it would be start to get kind of snarky, right, and
Right.
nasty. We would say things back and forth to one another, but at the end of the day, we were all just kind of having fun, and it was debauchery, so it was like whatever, But I'm meeting people also from everywhere, Australia, England, New Zealand, stuff like that, and um, so we end up start partying. We get to Cusco. It's a party. It happened to be this hostel's like 10-year anniversary, and it was such a crazy party. They like set this number 10 on fire, and there's fireworks happening, and it's just like, oh man, we end up just kind of going on a bender for 12 days before we even make arrangements to go to Machu Picchu. We have friends that have already come and gone and have already went up there, and we're just kind of having too much fun. And it starts, this is where once again I think the enemy was like, oh, perfect, like I'm now gonna get you back into your old habits, and you're gonna like, I'm just gonna, you're right, I'm gonna get you doing kind of making mistakes and whatever.
Yep.
So it starts to happen. I end up, doing drugs there, the white kind, that that are known for Peru, and I'd never had done it up to that point, and like just all these things I probably wouldn't have done, and but it's happening, and so finally one day, me and my buddies are all like, okay, or what are we gonna do? We got to get to Machu Picchu, right? So we end up doing like a 4-day kind of adventure trek, and it was awesome. It was like one of the first times that like they took us up to this mountain and gave us bikes to ride down into the village we were going to stay in. We whitewater rafted into the sunset. Um,
So are you like
we did
putting up
zip line.
tents and stuff in the jungles, or like what are you doing?
So
Like,
these were like the villages that we would go into. It was almost like a hotel, but they would have like arrangements with families or like or a building of some sort, like a hotel almost, but it not that fancy, but it was like, yeah, like these people are going to stay here. Tourism is like a big part of their economy, so it was pretty well thought out. But it was always like the hikes always started at like 4 in the morning because they wanted you to see the sunrise with by the time you're getting to the peak and stuff like that. So it was pretty cool, but it was like kind of hard after a night of partying, right? You're like, oh man, like now I got to get up, and
Mhm. Yeah.
So, but some of these experiences were great, and that's when I really could understand that, like, oh, I can use the bike to camp, and like I even did bike packing after this, right? Like you can load up all your camping stuff on your bike and just, be out there. And so that really inspired me that way. I was always fearful of heights, but like I went zip lining for the first time. Uh, like yeah, whitewater rafting down. I forgot the name of the river, but it was like pretty treacherous. But the guides were so comfortable and like just they were having fun, and and then the guides and stuff would hang out with us at the bar, the restaurant, whatever. So I felt safe. I never felt like, nothing's gonna happen. Money went pretty far over there. Like I think USD to Solis is their currency was like 3 to 1 or something. So you can eat like pretty well. Like I didn't run out of money, but it was great. And then the last day of the trek, or there was like a day where we hiked for like 8 hours on the old Inca Trail, and then it was like led us into like hot springs. So at the end of the hike, you're just like get to go in these hot springs. And then of course I was like, well, I don't have like swimsuit or anything. There's someone like selling them out in front, so you can buy a swimsuit. And I was just like, oh wow, like this is incredible.
How
But then we
convenient.
finally get to Machu Picchu, and there's like these 2,000 steps that you got to take. There's also like a bus that drops you off right in front, but of course, me and the buddies wanted like to do it properly, and so we get up at 4 in the morning, we hike up to the top, and by the time we get into the actual like into the park or the mountain, it's the sunrise is coming up, and I'm just like we spent all day there, and I'm finally there, and I just remember looking out, and I'm like, wow, this was all like they kind of show you like the when they first discovered it, and it's just completely covered in vegetation, and
Yeah.
you're just now it's just like a beautiful almost what it probably looked like at the time of the Inca, and you're just like this is amazing. I'm here at the spiritual haven, and as much as I'm sitting there, thinking I'm gonna get some kind of revelation or something, nothing happens, right? I'm just kind of there, and I'm just kind of like, okay, like cool, I'm here, and maybe that's it for a lot of people too, right? This is just an awesome view of a place that I went to go see, and but there wasn't spiritually not fulfilled, right? And this continues to be a theme in my life with all of this stuff that I was letting myself do, right? All the new age stuff, all the indigenous stuff. There is no fulfillment of the soul. There is no fulfillment in your spirituality. There was nothing, nothing. It's just a void. But you're every day, it's all about works, right? Every day I gotta smudge myself. I gotta go to this Machu Picchu and there I'll get something. Oh no, you get there, nothing happens, right?
Right.
Uh, and so, we leave, we go back, and I come back, and my girlfriend then at the time, now she's my wife, she was finishing up her master's when I was out in Peru, so she's gonna be moving to Salt Lake City, and so I moved back to Folsom. I get out of San Francisco, and I'm just like, I'm not going back to San Francisco. My wife, like, she's gonna get her master's, and we're probably gonna, start our life together. A lot of people were moving, starting their own families and stuff like that, and so I wasn't going back. I didn't have a job or anything, and so I'm kind of helping her go back and forth from Salt Lake City. It's kind of the fall of 2015, and I'm doing like odd jobs here and there and stuff. But I end up going to Salt Lake City, and she's at class, but this is the first time I watched the documentary Zeitgeist. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zeitgeist by Peter Joseph. And it's like a four-part documentary, right? And
Yeah.
the first part of it is talking about the solar Messiah, right? And it's talking about how every ancient civilization worshiped the sun, and that's basically what Jesus is representing, or what that's what it is, and that we're all being lied to. And talks about 9/11, talks about like World Building 7, all this stuff, and I'm just like, holy cow, here it is. Like if everybody saw this, if everybody knew this, why? Wouldn't everyone be upset? Wouldn't the world change? Wouldn't there be peace on earth? Stuff like that, like all these questions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of like, this is my new doctrine. This is it. Like I knew that Christianity was false. I knew that Jesus wasn't real. like, this is like what the enemy is just like, oh, he's like
Yeah,
perfect,
bro.
right? Once again, let's show you this and you're gonna eat it up. You're gonna love it. This is gonna be how you're gonna live your life now. And so that was kind of the catalyst of really kind of and I don't want to say I was into any certain new age idea, but all of it attracted me, and therefore I allowed all of it in. Um, my foundation was so weak, Bo, that I was just allowed it. I was like an open door, and so whatever came my way, I was into it. As long as it had nothing to do with God, as long as it had nothing to do with truth, with biblical stuff, it was always like new age concepts of like, yeah, the sun, Christ consciousness, uh,
Hmm.
crystals, sage, right? Like all these things, yoga, anything that I kind of thought. There was this book called The Secret where it talks to you more about manifestation, and like
Yep.
just bought
Yeah.
into all of it, right? And like, and
Yeah.
there, every once in a while something would happen where I thought I manifested it and was like, oh yeah, yeah, you just gotta, keep thinking about it and you'll manifest whatever you want in this world.
Hey, can I ask you,
Yeah,
are we talking like 2015, 2017, somewhere through there?
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I
this
was going
2015,
through, I was going through very similar stuff. Um, Man, and it was close to the same time.
right?
Like for me, it was, yeah, probably about 2014, 2015. I started getting into yoga, The Secret. Uh, I, dude, I've heard so many parallels. I didn't get to go to Peru, uh, but I met super close people that I bonded with. I got into conspiracy like 2008, 2009, 2007, somewhere through there. But I did mine was in the military. That's where I found my people. You know what I mean?
Got it. Yeah, yeah.
I'm hearing so many parallels while you're talking. I'm trying my best not to interrupt, but I'm like over here nodding my head like a
No, hey,
bobblehead because like, dude,
hey,
I
Bo,
get,
1 second.
yeah, bro,
I'm so
that's
sorry.
fine.
1 second.
Yeah, I was saying I can relate to so much to what you were talking about. For the last 8 years or so that you were covering of your life, because I went down through very similar things, like uh, getting into conspiracies, getting into Alex Jones, getting into just learning about other cultures, about my genealogy, um, all of it, dude. And it's weird that it's like in the same time frame. I think there were so many of us, and it was like leading up to when the world stopped turning for a couple of years there. Uh, I think all of us were feeling this pull, you know, and it was the Lord. But I don't know if maybe it's like an age thing. Maybe men go through this man search for meaning, like so many of us do.
Right.
But yeah, I just wanted to tell you, dude, I can relate so much um to getting into like riding that line of new age and stuff. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, man,
No, that's
I I just hear so many parallels. I'm just drawn into what you're talking about.
right. Yeah, and like, I'm trying not to like scatter around too much, but yeah, and that's how it feels because it was in I remember learning in when I was still in Texas about 2012 in the Aztec calendar, right? How the end of
Yep.
the world was going to happen, and one before then I had no idea about my indigenous roots and stuff. So it's funny even how that played a part where when 2012 was coming around, I was kind of like, maybe a couple people were like holding on to the edge of their seat a little bit, but I was like, something's going to change. And I don't want to say that it started to change them, but it's just kind of funny how after 2012 is where a lot of people went through this kind of awakening of trying to find answers for themselves. And maybe God was using that to essentially because it all leads, right? Sam Tripoli, I think, says it best where he's like, all conspiracies lead to Jesus, right? Like,
Yep.
and that's essentially where right this all ends. It's we're all searching for truth, and then when you hopefully hear the call, and get the elect to hear the word, I believe that's where my story led me to, is that
Yeah.
overall, and God probably used a lot of these interests that I had and all these people in my life to not only like I don't want to say to stray me away even more, but to give me an idea of like all this stuff won't fulfill you, right? He had to give me perspective. He had to give me this understanding that I went through it all. I did all these things, and and like I remember doing yoga, like at the time thinking I'm doing something, and now I look back, I'm like, I never did anything,
Right.
except somehow open myself up spiritually. And I think that the enemy used alcohol as the medium to control my life and to really ruin relationships and to really keep me in a cynical, dark place. Um, and not to sound cliche, but right, they call it spirits for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Alcohol spirits. And then of course, I would smoke marijuana and justify it with, well, God made this, right? This
Right.
this comes from the earth, so how could this be bad? And I thought the same with all of sage and Palo Santo, these natural things, crystals, right? We can find these things naturally, but and I remember having like a little altar, but it's not that I was doing any dark, real ritualistic things, but the fact that I had them in general was allowing this. It wasn't about God at all, right? That separation remained. And so, yeah, my own little theory about 2012 is this: I think people started, or maybe, and I don't want to say certain people, but I have plenty of friends that I feel like they aren't searching and they aren't, they're pretty content with the world. They're pretty content
Yeah.
with what they know and their jobs and their, their education and everything like that. And I just have always, hey buddy, and I've always just have had that that craving and that hunger for more. Oh, there's my
Yeah.
son.
What's up, buddy?
You say hi? So yeah, so I ended up watching Zeitgeist, right? I ended up totally buying into it, totally thinking, and I'm trying to tell my parents about this. I'm trying to tell everyone I know about this documentary and it's also opened me up to a bunch of conspiracies, which, I still, and it's funny, I'm still into it, but like I said, it's all led me to Jesus, and it's all led me in the right direction. But it
Amen.
there is stuff happening in our world that we just don't understand, and it's darker than we think, and of course, if someone can make money or if someone can change a policy or something, of course, things will happen if they have to, and so my wife ends up finishing her master's. She moves back from Salt Lake City, and then we kind of move into Sacramento. I want to say it's about 2016 at this time. And yeah, we're trying to start our life together, and and then we're having just kind of I'm having a lot of I think this is really where I'm dealing with alcohol. I moved to Sac and there was for the first time there's like craft beer, right? Sacramento's known for a lot of breweries, and when I lived in San Francisco, I was just drinking the cheap stuff because I couldn't afford to drink the good stuff, and my palate wasn't really there. And so at this point in life, I'm like getting into craft beer. I'm getting into like IPAs. I'm getting into these. I'm becoming a connoisseur, right? I'm like thinking, oh, I
Yeah.
know beers and like oh whatever. Um, and I'm making more money now, so I can also afford these. Rent's cheaper, and so I start kind of just diving into that even deeper, right? And with I was never really into hard alcohol, anyways, but I would take a shot here and there, and stuff like that. But then you start slowly graduating from IPA to doubles to triples to hazies to, and then then you become like you want to mix them all, and or at least I was, and uh, yeah, so I kind of got caught up in that, and there was a moment there where yeah, I was playing softball, and so if we lost a game, we're drinking. If we won a game, we're drinking. If we have a double header, we're drinking.
Yeah, man.
Every event, just you can just make it all about alcohol, right? And so social. It's so acceptable anywhere you go. Um, I end up proposing to my wife in the year 2017, and we went out camping and did like a backpacking trip. And I remember we get to this campground, and we only hiked about 2 miles in. We had two dogs at the time, and we set up camp, and it's this area called Loon Lake in the El Dorado National Forest, and it's just a beautiful night and kind of windy, so but we end up passing out. I think I started probably drinking couple heavy beers probably when we got there, just whatever, and we got sleepy, dozed off. But this is probably one of the first nights that I can say I experienced things in the sky. But at the
Hmm.
time, I don't want to say like at the time there I didn't even think about it, right? I wasn't like, oh man, this happened to me. But so as I'm sleeping, it's a windy night, so I'm kind of in and out of sleep. But at one point, I wake up and I see white lights kind of all around. Like there's, our we had no rain cover on the tent, so I could kind of see through the mesh. And there's like a ridge across the lake, and across the ridge, I see these white lights, and I'm thinking like, oh, someone's night hiking, right? Someone's still on the trail while they're. But as I'm laying there, I'm thinking like, whoa, those are really bright lights, though. Like, you know what I mean? Like, how I can they almost look like they're kind of shining at me, and it's so windy that like. You know what I mean? Like, why would they be shining this direction if they're hiking? They would be looking in front of them. Why would they be pointing
Right.
over here or what? And I remember looking up, and then falling asleep, waking up again, and now these lights are like green, right? And this is where I'm like, were you in and out of sleep or whatever, And I'm like thinking like that was weird, right? We wake up the next day. I was supposed to propose to my wife that night. We fell asleep. We didn't. So I wake up the next morning and I'm thinking like, okay, I got to do it. And so we went to the lake to draw water in our filter. And as she's, I kind of prompt her to go in front of me so I can kneel down. And I remember that feeling, right, of like kneeling down. And I'm like, oh man, I hope she says yes. Like this is so scary. And like she turns around and like I'm like, she's like, oh my gosh, and I'm like, will you marry me? And I remember the ring didn't fit. I didn't get her right size after I even discussed it with her best friend and mom. It was still the wrong size, so it was like too big. And I remember being like, "Oh, dang it! Like this is not the way I wanted it to go." Uh, and either way, she was stoked. I was trying not to pout too hard, but I kind of wanted it to be perfect, and it was
Yeah.
already all kind of a weird mess. But and
Still
to
romantic,
make
man.
right, and to make it even worse, our it's so windy that our tent flies up and falls into the lake,
Oh no.
and the lake is freezing, right? I'm like, I Mexican. I'm like, I'm not one for cold water and cold weather, so I'm like, I'm not going in there to get it, and my wife jumps in, gets it. That adds to like the grumpiness of like, man, this is like, I don't know if this is a good omen or bad, and I'm talking about omens at this point, right? Like, I believe in any kind of sign like that as if this isn't supposed to be good, this isn't supposed to be right. Um, And so we hike out of there, and everything's okay. We dry everything off, and now I'm engaged, right? And I'm thinking like, cool. And so at that time too, I'm thinking like, okay, like those lights were just kind of maybe weird dreams that I had, and they don't mean anything. But when you're out there, there's not many people, there's not many, you know, towers or anything like that. So I always had that in the back of my mind. And then so that's we get married in 2018, and this marriage, I love my wife, love what we've been together for 17 years, married for 7, been together for 10 before that. Very blessed, truly believe that God put her in my life, because just we've grown up since we were kids. I was 19, she was 21, and we just have gone through a lot together. And I think when we were in our early 20s, yeah, like, a couple of years there we were off and on, but overall, like that year when I went to Peru and she was starting her master's was definitely like we could have just separated then, right, and gone our own ways, but I think we both chose to continue to grow together and to do life together. And so we end up getting married, but at this point, right, I'm I'm completely lost at this point, and spiritually. And so marriage has nothing to do with God. This bond, this marriage has, we had our friend and officiate the wedding, one of our good friends who great person, but yeah, like and one blessing though was that we at first we're gonna elope. We were just gonna do our own thing, just our close friends. And the more and more we thought about it, like, we both had big families, and we knew that I don't think we could repair eloping, and you know, like our friend, it would be too much for our families to handle if we really didn't have them be a part of it. And it almost felt, we knew in our hearts like we're not that cynical and that selfish to not include our family. So we ended up changing our minds and like opening it up to the families, right? And so we had about 150 people, and you know, my wife's family's from um they're from uh the East Coast, Wisconsin. My family's all in California, you know, and my parents are divorced, so it's one of the first times they're both going to be in the same kind of place, you know, for me, essentially at the same time. And I just wanted no drama. I wanted to integrate it right, and so all the families there, you know, and you know, a lot of both sides are come from. My wife grew up Lutheran, so she was, you know, she would always say it was like diet Catholic, and so um, you know, her family's there. So, you know, but the ceremony is definitely has nothing to do with God. And you know, my friend does like, you know, her bit. It's pretty funny. We have the dogs up there. We to symbolize our matrimony, we planted a marijuana seed, you know. We had my buddy who introduced me to the whole indigenous concept about me. Like he did a whole smudging ceremony, and you know, it was this very like, we were like, wow, you know, I'm wearing a tunic with, and I have like a little turtle like necklace, because my whole life my mom's side of the family called me Turtle on the account that I love Ninja Turtles. But and
Right.
I would always say like, oh, the turtle is my spirit animal, right? Like I
Right.
connect with it somehow. That's part of me. Um and so, right, and I end up getting, you know, we end up, it's a wedding, it's a fun time. I end up, you know, having too much fun, and you know, it's a great night, you know, stuff like that. But that's one thing that I've lately been talking to God about, and really have surrendered our bond and the, you know, our bond of matrimony and that whole marriage to Jesus as of late, because I know
Yes.
at the time I was so far and removed and separate that I had no that was now I know that to make us one flesh, I have to say, hey, this is now belongs to you. You know, this was yours. You put us together. You know, really trying to reconcile that. You know, because that's just what I feel in my heart now. That, you know, I wish, right? It's like one of those things. I don't want to say it's a regret, but it's the way it all worked out, and now I'm able to reconcile that with Jesus and really say, hey man, this belongs to you, and it always did. You know, my
Amen.
bad, right? Because it was definitely not anything to do with you, and it should have, right? Because you know, we've certain things will have come out of that, you know, where it wasn't always easy and it wasn't always hard, and even I remember we went to Yosemite for our honeymoon, and I remember that first night, I'm so overwhelmed with despair of like, oh my gosh, like I just got married. Like it's this weird feeling of like where I should have been, I had no joy, no grace. It was despair and like fear of like, this is who I'm spending the rest of my life with. My life, like I'm not a kid anymore. This is like, I just did this thing and it had
Right.
no foundation in God, right? Like as I'm reflecting now at the time, I just don't know what is happening to me, but I'm like, the only thing I could think of is despair and like fear that, oh my gosh, what did we do? You know, like like I knew then God put that in my heart to be like, hey, like, you know, you're kind of a big deal, and you didn't include me on this, right?
Yeah, man.
So I think, you know, and we ended up hiking and backpacking the rest of the week, and you know, once again, get you get lost in what I thought was my foundation of nature and essentially pagan ideals, right? Right? You're in Yosemite, you're seeing all these rocks, and you're thinking that is what I'm about, right? That is what defines me, and so we, you know, we become we start learning more about who we are as we're getting married, you know, and we get this. That was 2018, so about October, I want to say, is when we conceived my first kid, Santiago, uh and leading up to it, it's, you know, I'm kind of, you know, as I told you earlier, I'm a cyclist. I work in the bike industry. You know, I'm really passionate about bikes. And so I was riding my bike and ended up getting a very bad injury where it was in my like perennial area, and just wouldn't wish this kind of pain on anybody because it was, it was so bad where I couldn't relax without feeling like electric shock in that area, and like just really bad where I was. And I'm pretty sure at this point I'm like praying, right? I'm asking
Yeah,
God to
dude.
take this away. I'm like, I, once again, I'm making some kind of, I'll do anything, right? Just make this stop.
Yeah.
But this happens about 2 weeks before my son is here, and we end up having a home birth in the house in Sacramento. Um and once again, God is so good because we are over here. I was even entertaining the idea of like a free birth, but we end up doing like midwives and like having a home birth, and still like I had so much trust in us, and because of my foundation of Christ consciousness and the new age that we can manifest this if we want. And God was so good that He still was there with us and allowed everything to be safe and good for us. And I'll never forget, catching my son, right? And kind of almost it was the first time where I felt those generational curses being broken in a way when I caught my own son and was able to be there for him, and almost with that feeling of like I'll never leave you, right? Like this I'm changed now. I'm like someone new, but once again, like my son's born, and I remember when my mom meets him, she's like, "Oh, we need to present him to Jesus," and I'm just like, "Absolutely not." I remember saying those words, just still so separate and so set on the idea that no, that is a lie, and please stop. Like, Mom, you're infuriating me, right? Because that's please, that my son will not be part of this charade or whatever, right? I'm so convinced that it's false and that this has nothing to do with him. And yet God was so good and allowed us to be safe, mom to be healthy, for baby to be healthy, for me to all that pain that I was in because of that bike accident is now gone, and I'm able to just be a present, learn to be a father, right? And so I'm starting to grow up a little bit, right? I'm starting to like understand things a little bit. I'm like, whoa, like the story of my late sister and my parents is starting to make more sense to me now, of like, oh wow, they went through something horrible, right? Like before I always knew it was a sad story, but now that I have my own child, it's like, no, like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. And so, we become uh we become parents, but sorry, backtrack a little bit. Before my son was born, that spring we actually had a baby moon, right? I don't know if you've heard of these. Is before you give birth, you go out and do like a honeymoon type activity to kind of honor the baby that's coming in. I think it's like a new age thing, or it might be just a millennial thing. I don't know, but it's like it was a concept, and we went to go do a baby moon, and so we went to Vegas, visited my dad, and we actually rented a van where we it was like kind of like a cheap camper van setup, and we were able to like go out, and we kind of hiked and camped around the southern part of Utah, which is like the Grand Escalade area, and we actually went to the east side of Nevada, which I'd never been, but it's called the Valley of Fire, and so these places were, we're camping and like having fun, but this is the first time, or no, this is the second time that I felt sleep paralysis was after the Valley of Fire. We get there and there's all these petroglyphs, and I'm excited about these, right? I'm like,
Right.
oh man, like ancient writings, like yeah, let's go look. They have some petroglyphs that you can actually take like a staircase to and really look at them, and if you were bold enough, touch them, right, without essentially potentially ruining it. But you get pretty close. And I remember this night of sleep paralysis. I'm in the van, and it's as if the it's right away I'm frozen and I'm looking, and it's the van has transformed into my room in Sacramento, where it was like the master bedroom, and then right in front of us was a mirror. So it's as if I'm in that room, and I look and I'm like can see myself laying there in the mirror in our room, but I'm in my head, I'm like, I'm not in Sacramento. I'm in the van in the Valley of Fire. And the whole time I'm trying to scream, I'm trying to get out of it, right? I'm just feeling total oppression, like something is holding me down, and I'm like, and I know my wife is next to me, so you're trying to move to grab her, you're trying to shout loud enough for her to hear me, and nothing, right? I eventually snap out of it. I'm in the van, and I'm thinking like, oh, you're just claustrophobic because you're in a van, and it's, you're in a new environment. These
Right.
are the things I'm telling us.
Yeah.
Uh, the first time I had it, sorry to backtrack a little bit more,
You're
but
good.
during the time when my wife was finishing her master's in Salt Lake City, I was at my parents' house and I had it. She had come home to visit. I think it was, I forgot why, but she was there, so we were there, and we were in my room, and I remember sleeping, and same thing, felt frozen, couldn't move. I start freaking out right away, trying to yell for her to hear me, to wake me up, and all of a sudden, this that I knew what I couldn't see it, but I knew whatever was holding me down was standing in the doorway. So I was like laying down, the TV's on, I could hear the TV, I can hear my wife like giggling and laughing at whatever she's watching. But I know whatever it is that's oppressing me is standing in the doorway to the room looking at me as
Mm.
I'm frozen, right? And I never had experienced sleep paralysis before. These were the only two times, and the only two times since. And at that time when I was living with my folks, my brother, with all due respect, he's an addict, and has fallen off pretty bad, and he continues to struggle with it. Him and he's gone through a lot of things in his life, and I pray for him a lot. I pray for him every day for Jesus to give him the tap on the shoulder to and hearing some of the testimonies on your show of people that pretty much have to hit rock bottom over and over again before they really
Yeah, bro.
come to Christ. I almost think of that, but it's been so many years that you kind of, I don't give up hope, but it's one of those things where before I was found by God, it's like there's so many ways, at first I would try to be his big brother and be angry at him and like, come on, dude, you gotta like straighten up. And at this time, I'm like trying, I'm the one living there until we figure out our life with my wife before she figures out her master's. And, my parents and my brother are arguing about whatever. And they had some like supernatural things happen where like, some photos had fallen off their wall. They had the house anointed, and my stepdad actually fell back and collapsed. So things
Wow.
were happening during this time, and I was so still wrapped up in my own life and really using this as like a, hey, I'm just here temporarily, so don't really involve me, right? Like I'm just gonna go to my room and I'm gonna be in and out, so like I don't live here, right? But
Right.
that was the first time I had sleep paralysis, was during kind of that time when my family were all going through some stuff. Um, and once again, as I'm learning now, it's like these generational curses that may be on a family is you don't run away from it, right? I mean, you can, but I've always tried to separate myself from that and from them or from anyone else that may be struggling with something. And the fact of the matter is, when it's your family, you can't run, from it, and that's one thing God's been putting on my heart lately is that if this is gonna heal, if we're gonna heal together in my name, and that's how
Mm.
this is gonna happen. So, I mean, those were times where I got sleep paralysis, and I always thought sleep paralysis was this scientific kind of thing, right? That people can say, hey, this is really what's happening in the mind, and so on and so forth. So I had those experiences, and I truly believe that the second time when we were in Nevada was that I was so open to everything that when I was giving all my energy to these petroglyphs, whatever spirits were there like that, and they were the ones that
Yeah.
try to oppress me that night. And it was because I was uh, giving it energy and glorifying those petroglyphs and whatever it was that they represented. I never did too much more digging after that because at the end of the day, we were just there on vacation and wanted to come back. Um, so yeah, some side notes there with sleep paralysis, but um, coming back, we have our son, and things are going good. We're learning to be parents. We end up getting pregnant again. Oh, COVID happened, so my son was born in 2019. And learning to be parents, and I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be a dad. I'm so excited to share with him, to my family, my mom's side of the family, who have always been my dad. We're rekindling our relationship, because I had kind of deeper talks with both my mom and dad one on one about my life and try to get answers, and but still I was not a man of God, so I was trying to just do it for self, right? To self help type of thing,
Yeah.
therapeutic type of healing, and just really wanted to know why my life was the way it was. And as we know, only God can help with that. I can't expect another human to give me understanding of like why things happen the way they did, right? They're just trying to process their own lives, and I can didn't want to focus too much on that. So I'm so stoked. And the weekend that the world kind of changed, it was like early March, and we were in Vegas. My sister was up. She had her son too, who was only 3 months older than my son. So it was kind of cool because we were 6 months or 6 years apart, and I never thought I was gonna have cousins and kids with my siblings. But my
Right.
sister ended up, so we ended up going to see my dad. And I remember hearing like, oh, airports are shutting down, right? Like they're not letting people on their flights, stuff like that. This is happening. We get back to SAC, and like, yeah, lo and behold, things are changing. Um, Everything happened, everything shut down. My son's first birthday, I remember we didn't even invite any of the grandparents that were living locally because we were just all like kind of like, hey, we don't know what's going on, but we shouldn't be
Yeah.
together. Um, yeah, so that, that kind of happens. In the mix of that, we have my daughter Dahlia in 2021, and so it was kind of sooner than we thought. I remember when I learned that I was going to be a dad again, I was like, how did this happen?
Mhm.
The classic like, are you kidding me?
Right.
And just wasn't expecting it to happen because it felt like right when we were getting kind of our groove with one kid, it was like, oh, now it's going to change, and holy cow, here we go. And so, but what a blessing, same thing. We had the same midwives, but they actually kind of swapped roles. The assistant with my son's, uh, the midwife that was the assistant during my son was actually now the head midwife. And then by, or not by chance, but because God's plan, the main midwife was actually the assistant, the one on call that day. So we got the same faces in to help us with our second child. Um, And once again, God was so good. This one was a little bit more complicated. My daughter's umbilical cord was like wrapped around her shoulder and making it very hard for her to come out. And I remember like I just never gave up hope. I had so much trust and faith in my wife. And but I remember when she said something, my wife audibly says like something's wrong. And I just remember being like, oh man, I cannot give that energy, right? Because it's,
Right.
at that time I'm thinking like it'll come true if I just say, oh, something's wrong.
Right.
And I just keep trying to comfort her, and the midwives like eventually like see that the umbilical cord's wrapped around her shoulder, and they had to intervene and help her get it off. And then, right away my this was good for my wife because she was the way she was positioned, she was actually able to like grab her first and like bring her up to her right away. So like really no
Oh,
one even caught her except for my wife. And I remember hearing my wife say like, "Give her to me." Like she was this, this was healing, I think, for my wife on her own to hold her daughter.
yeah.
Um, and so it was, God is good, and once again was able to like give us both some type of generational healing by catching our kind of our kids, right? The kind of our because as a parent, I don't know about you, Bo, but like I feel like I relived a lot of my childhood as they grow up and continue to like remember things when you were that age and stuff like that. So a lot of things came up that year and these years with the kids, and so at that time, my grandpa ends up dying, and he already had dementia. My mom's dad, the one that gave me my first guitar, and it you realize that my my grandpa was like he was the cornerstone of our family with faith and with Jesus and with it all, because after his passing everything started to unravel with my family. My uncle, one of my mom's oldest brother, ends up dying of COVID 2 months later. Got hooked up to a ventilator and never bounced back, and just we lost him. And during this time, our family, like my sister, me, my brother, my mom, we're all kind of trying to come together. We're getting closer as a unit. The more, the most we've had in years, and it's coming up that certain things happened to my mom, my sister, and my brother. They were victims of, of predators, essentially, sexual abuse. And it all kind of came out with my grandpa passing, my uncle, like, because it happened internally in the family. And it was someone that married into the family. And like my whole paradigm shifted, right? My
Yeah,
whole
man.
upbringing didn't make sense anymore. I was filled with so much anger because I felt like I just wanted to protect my sister, my brother, my mom, and I couldn't. I didn't. And it started to explain a lot of things about how they are, right? I was still not a man of God, so I'm thinking like, oh, this is the reason why they are the way they are. And I'm getting so angry about this person in the family and like how other people. It feels like some people are protecting him. It feels like other people don't care. It feels like other people who do care, like no one's calling the cops, no one's reporting it. How is this happening? And everything started to unravel, and all I knew is that, okay, well then I need to protect my own family. I'm not bringing my son around this. I'm not bringing my daughter around this family because I don't it feels like everyone's in on it, and we're the last ones to know, or I'm the last one, because my whole upbringing just seemed to have been betrayed. And on top of everything else, right? It just felt like I didn't know my grandma. I didn't know my grandma essentially started protecting this person, and because he was a man in her church and was saying like, there's no way he could do this. And I was just like, there's
Right.
too heavy, and I didn't understand that I was making it hard. And we ended up have a falling out for another year or two, right? Because I just was like, well, I don't get it, because it was this anger. Once again, the enemy was just able to, like, instead of use this material to fuel my anger against everything, right? I ended up pushing my family away, I ended up pushing God away again. All of it. It just was another separation, and even deeper now because I'm not understanding how this could have happened in a family with family members. Like, this is gnarly. This is disgusting. And as a parent now, I'm thinking, well, I'm just gonna hold on to my kids and not come around, right? But
Right.
this started to put distrust in me. I didn't trust anyone. I didn't even trust myself to hold my own son. I didn't want there to be any kind of like confusion about anything, right? I was just so worried that people can misconstrue something, or you know what I mean, and no babysitters, no nothing. And we still kind of live by that rule, you know what I mean? Because it's unfortunate, the statistics with these types of things, and it's usually someone, usually someone in the family, usually someone in your community. And I, and once I knew who it was, it just all you go back in the memory banks and you're like, oh my gosh, this person made it very normal to be a kid, to watch Star Wars with us, to play video games with us, and that's how they get in. They make it, this is who they are. And I just couldn't believe it. And because of my mom kind of having generational things with my grandma, like, and my grandma then essentially siding with this person who had done these things. I was I had picked my side, right? I was like, well, I'm with my mom because this is crazy, right? My grandma isn't who I think she is. My grandpa passed away,
Mm.
and now the truth is all coming out. It was bad, and there's still a little bit of that coming out, but or still a little bit of that lingering.
Yeah, for sure.
So we end up, and because it's COVID too, it's like, even okay, well, now I have to be indoors with my family. I have to be separate anyway, so easy. Kind of like perfect timing, right? But kind of weird
Yeah.
how it all happened like that. God's timing for it. Um, and so um, my daughter's born, and it's 22. I think my alcoholism is just getting worse. I'm just drinking every day to cope. You can't go anywhere, so might as well pick up a six pack after work. I had kind of been working at a new bike shop, and it's crazy, Bo, how cycling and alcohol are pretty much hand in hand. Like you can start a bike ride at a brewery. You can, if you work in a shop, there's usually, beers in the fridge. You can have one on lunch, stuff like it's very acceptable. Obviously, no one is saying get tanked, but of course, like I didn't I didn't care, right? It was like, okay, the moment it was 6 o'clock and the shop was closed, I would go drink three, get home. I'm already buzzed, so I'm gonna keep drinking, right? And essentially I was escaping even being a father at that point, right? Being a parent because I'm just like, well, this is hard, right? I'm gonna have to be up in 2 hours. I have two kids now. I'm gonna just keep the good times rolling, right? And I'm also gonna escape for 20 minutes and go smoke pot on the porch because I don't want to do it in the house because of the kids, but I'm gonna go disappear for 20 minutes and come back and oh no, I don't want to change my shirt, like all this stuff. And it just it was that was kind of the cycle for a minute there, right?
Yeah.
And the end of 22, I remember it was like the holidays. We had both kids, and I'm just kind of like, at this point, I'm getting spiritually exhausted. I'm like, I'm done. My life is like the same. I have two kids, and I don't know how to fix it. I lost my whole family due to what's happened in the family. I don't talk to my sister. I don't talk to my brother. My dad is elsewhere with his family, so what does he care about what I'm going through? Pity party, and I'm just drinking, smoking, but I'm spiritually exhausted to the point that it's New Year's Eve 2022, and my wife and I are like, well, let's just hang out at the house. We'll just watch a movie. We have two kids, right? We're not going anywhere. It's about 11 something at night, and all of a sudden we start to hear or feel the earth shake. We start to hear cracking and rippling. People outside are screaming, and all of a sudden our whole house shakes, and it's just like boom. And I'm like, whoa, what was that? The kids don't wake up. We run outside because I'm thinking someone's dead. This big oak tree in front of our house had completely fallen over and was on our roof. And the people that were screaming were just people walking back from the bar, and they had stopped enough, close enough to see it happen. And there's no damage to the house. There's no one is dead. This tree is just awkwardly laying on our home. The kids are still asleep, and I'm thinking, what the heck? Like, how did it, because it sounded gnarly, right? It sounded like
Yeah.
the world was shaking, the roots were ripping from the earth, people are screaming, and no one's hurt, no one's dead, nothing's damaged, but there's this big sore thumb of a tree laying on my house. And I'm like, oh my gosh. The next day is January 1, 2023, and I'm just like, I'm not gonna drink. I'm gonna do dry January. Um, and dry January came and went, and I just kept going. Right?
Thank the
I think
Lord.
God was like, you know what? You're spiritually tired. This is what we're gonna do. Um, and I don't want to. Now looking back, I think the tree was. It has to be some importance of God saying, "Boom, your world's now shaken, and you're not even ready for what's coming." Right? Like this is really
Amen.
the beginning of what's happening, and so I end up getting back into cycling. I get back into fitness. I feel clarity for the first time after 3 months of not drinking. And I'm like, holy cow, this is amazing. Like, this is what I needed in my life is this clear mind and I'm still smoking marijuana at the time, but I'm, it's just incredible what kind of stronghold that alcohol had on me, right?
Yeah.
It took me 3 months to finally get clarity back. I did my first century that year where you ride 100 miles in one sitting, and I'm doing these things that I've never thought I would do, and I'm gaining fitness. And because I'm sober, I'm able to see the kids and be in their lives in a different way. I'm seeing life through a new lens in a way, but still not a man of God yet. But I'm at this point dealing with, at this point, my brother's kind of still, I'm realizing that, okay, I need to love him where he's at. I need to learn, I'm hitting everything from a more scientific approach about like, codependency, learning more about what an addict is and really, and once again, I'm not an addict, but he is. And I know that he needs to find God to get fixed, but I don't. I'm giving him all these talks and all these suggestions and all this advice, but it doesn't pertain to me. It's only for him.
Right.
And so I remember it was probably one of the first times I prayed or really brought God back up where I was like, only God can fix my brother. Only him. That's the only way he's gonna get his life back together. Not me, but him.
Right.
And I think God was like, that's funny you say that, right? Because it's actually going to be you, you know? And so at this time in 23, my wife had wanted to try being a travel therapist. She's an occupational therapist at one of the local networks here, and we really wanted to get our finances like we wanted to find financial freedom. We really wanted to like try to figure out a way to make as much money as while the kids were young. Because at this point I was working full time, she was working full time. We're asking the grandparents a lot to watch the kids, and when they couldn't, we had to struggle, and it was stressful. And I was even having more falling outs with my parents because I was like, well, you got to help me. And they're like, well, we're busy, right? I was relying too
Right.
much on them. And
Yeah.
so eventually, we were supposed to leave in March. That fell through. And at the same time, though, I'm kind of falling back into my like, oh, I just want to be liked. I just want to, I'm getting back into cycling. So that means more group rides. I'm immersing myself more in the community. Um, and I can do all these things and my ego's getting boosted. So it's like, oh, I really don't want to leave. And my wife's like, okay, well, I got it signed up. Where are we going to go? We wanted to go to Eureka, which is on the coast in the Redwoods. And it's kind of a nice city. And that ended up falling through. And so we had to kind of look at what other areas were available because we wanted to be out in nature somewhere like that. Um, and try a different way of living. But deep down, I'm really hoping that she just changes her mind so I don't have to leave my cycling community, my life here, and get uprooted and go. And
Right.
so selfishly, we're looking at places, and I have this bike book, the cycling book, and it has all these rides in this place called Crescent City, right? And it's the farthest north on the coast that you can go. You're about 30 minutes from Oregon border, and there's all these amazing roads, right? These maps that people have put together. There's one author, and I'm like, oh man, like yeah, there's like 5 rides I can do out there. Like this is I gotta get up there, and I'm like, hey, how about Crescent City? She looks, and yeah, there's a hospital up there that she can work for, and she has her interview, and they're like, hey, just so you know, this place is pretty rural. It's remote, and then we're like, yeah, that's fine. We know what that means, and
Even better. Yeah.
uh, right, exactly, and like and selfishly, right? Once again, I'm like, well, if I'm gonna leave my cycling community, I at least want to go to a place where I'm gonna love riding my bike and can do that. And I've always loved the redwoods. I've always because of that summer camp being in Santa Cruz. It's kind of the same vibe. Um, and so we pack up. We end up leaving our house, and the craziest thing is that we had lived in that house where both kids were born for 7 years when we left. So the number of completion, right? God was like, all right,
Yeah.
7 years, you're done, you're moving on. I'm still sober from alcohol. I'm still not a man of God, and I'm excited. I'm kind of excited, but yet selfishly wanting this to fall through, and selfishly wanting to stay, but I can't tell my wife that because she's really set on this. And this is also her career, and she wants to do this, and I'm gonna get a chance to be a stay-at-home dad, which I was kind of fond of the idea. And
Right.
so we end up moving. We leave August 1st. We're up there by August 6th, and we're in Crescent City, and this place is small. This place is not rural, it's remote. There's one road in, one road out. There's one little shot, it's tiny. And I'm like, oh man, like, and at first it's hard not to fall in love because it's kind of late summer. The tourism is still kind of happening, sunny days and stuff, but it's also PNW, so that means it's going to be wet, foggy,
Yep.
and I'm not even prepared for that yet. So right away, we're kind of in vacation mode. We camped for the first week while my wife was doing like orientation and stuff like that or onboarding. And then I remember the day we got into we did this thing called Furnish Finder where it's like Airbnb, but it's for longer term and the houses are already furnished and stuff. So we move in, and that first night we're just so grateful because it starts to rain, and I'm just thinking like, oh man, I'm so glad we're indoors in a bed because it's been nice all week, and with the kids, like I'm just glad that we're not camping. And there's like thunderstorms happening, and I'm like, oh wow, and I fall asleep to the sound of rain, not knowing that those thunderstorms were creating, were hitting, lightning was coming down and actually started the Smith Complex fire, which was a really bad fire that happened up there, where we end up going a huge power outage for 6 days, and they couldn't contain the fire because of the rugged mountainous terrain that it was on. And so, right away we're already kind of in camping mode anyway. So it's like, okay, we don't have power, we don't have internet. And right away we were like immersed in the ruggedness, right? We had to buy a generator. We're cooking all our meals still outdoors. We had to use lamps and, we wanted they advised us to get like a hand turned radio so we can get updates and stuff like that. And
Right.
6 more days and I'm kind of at this point thinking like, did we make a good choice? Is this what we should be doing, and it's just incredible, right? God's like, "Yep, you're right where I need you to be,"
Yeah.
and so that happens, right? And we get through it, and I'm just thinking like, "Oh man, we can. This is kind of fun. This is different. This is, this air. There's clean air up here. There's beautiful redwoods. I'm in awe, right? And I'm thinking the whole time still bikes, 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 and I'm thinking every time my wife starts going to work more re- uh, on a routine, and I'm taking the kids out on these amazing hikes, and I'm starting to notice that like no one's out here anymore. Tourism is kind of dead, and there's these amazing hikes right 5 minutes from the door, driving, like, and you can kind of go anywhere. You're in this awesome riparian area. You're in redwoods. There's sand dunes. Um, there's a bunch of stuff happening, and there's really no one around, and that's when I started to realize like, okay, it's remote, man. Like no one's out here, like everyone's working, right? People who actually have like probably lumber jobs and just doing the best they can. The people that actually live day in and day out here. I'm just privileged and lucky that I'm a stay-home dad and my wife's working at the hospital and I get to enjoy it with my kids.
Right.
And so every time we would go on a hike, the whole time I'm really doing reconnaissance on, can I ride this on my bike later? Is this a bike friendly trail? What should I be looking for? Because at the same time too, there's no GPS or you run out of cell service. So if I get hurt or if something sketchy comes up, I'm gonna be in trouble. So I'm kind of at least thinking that way with every hike that I'm taking the kids on. Can I ride this later when my wife gets home and takes over with the kids? And I end up finding, this is about August, September, and I end up finding a friend who lives in the area through a cycling app called Strava, where you can record your rides and hikes and runs and stuff. And
Right.
I end up finding somehow on the heat maps that he's riding the area and he's doing this incredible road ride. And I'm kind of like, I hit him up on the message there, and I'm like, hey, we should ride, or something, because I just moved and kind of, and this is already strange because you usually hit people up on like Instagram, right, or some kind of social media. This is before Strava was kind of even had a direct message, so I think I even commented on one of his rides, so he has to see it, and eventually he reaches out, and he happens to be a ranger for the Redwood State Park up there, so he's like,
Sweet.
yeah, dude, let's go for a ride. And he's kind of like, he told me later he was actually hesitant because he's like, who the heck is this reaching out? And I don't know if I can trust this guy, And so we end up meeting like a mutual location to meet, and we go on a ride. And the place that he takes me to is actually a place that was already on my radar, and it's called Yantakit. Have you heard of that, Bo?
I haven't.
Yantakit. So it's the Crescent City was the land of the Tolowa Nation, and Yantakit is actually this burial land where one of the top five massacres happened in the United States. I want to say it was in 1853. About 30 settlers just surrounded them while they were doing their kind of their new age, or not their new age, their winter revival. Like all the tribes of the area were in one area, kind of doing like a festival, and they got surrounded by 30 settlers and just massacred. They broke kind of the rules of engagement, and instead of letting the old and the women and children go, they just anybody that came running, they just shot, and it's kind of a ceremonial, or it's like a memorial there. And so it was already on my radar by looking it up. I had actually found it by once again looking at bike routes, and someone had written it and made it part of their YouTube page where they were like, oh yeah, we went to Yantakit and you can ride through there. There's trails, and it kind of gave a little bit of a breakdown. And I was like, oh, well, I never heard of this, and looked it up, and I was kind of like, oh, I need to go check that out, right? I need to go pay honor. I need to pay homage to this. I need to go and do something, not pray, but go and once again open myself up to whatever may be there.
Right.
And so when we meet up and he's like, hey, we're gonna go, and he starts telling me, he's like, have you ever heard of Yantake? We're going. I'm like, dude, yeah, we're going there. And he's like, yeah, we're gonna ride to there. And so we rode. Beautiful ride. The rides are just beautiful everywhere you can ride there. And we get there, and the memorial's all set up. Somehow I was glad to know that you can ride your bike through there, but they had a sign for no equestrians, which is kind of odd. You usually find the opposite, right? Like equestrians allowed,
Right.
bikes no. And so we get up there, and he kind of tells me a little bit more about the winter renewal festival that was actually happening when they got massacred and all this stuff, and how some of the families that were participated in that massacre actually still own a lot of the land. The settlers that own the land in that area, and there's still kind of bad blood with the Talawa and essentially the the people, right? The residents of this area with these
Right.
families. And a lot of the families who still own it are like farmers, right? So that's what this area was used for. They planted kind of like European beach grass to flatten out the sand dunes for their cattle to graze. And so there's just a lot of, you know, good history there, rich history with stuff like that. And we ride through there, and and right away I'm just thinking like, oh man, this guy's super cool. He's a little younger than me, and he's so wise and has like a cool job, and he's living the dream out here. He
Oh,
figured
yeah.
things out. Wow, good for him. And we're riding bikes, and this is great. And so uh you know so about that time, as we were going to Yantakit, there's this house that's kind of on the outskirts of that property. It's called the Talawa Dune State Park that the Yantakit Memorial's on, but there's also this house. And he said, hey, in the future, if you're ever riding around here, don't go through his driveway. He's a scientist that works for uh, the state park, and he just doesn't like people going through his yard. He's going to tell you to get out or whatever. And I'm like, okay, good to know. And there's a perfectly good road that takes you around, and it turns into gravel, so it's cool. And that was the kind of riding I was into. I was into like road slash gravel. It's like a road bike, but it has bigger tires, and so not quite mountain bike, but mixed terrain.
Yeah.
And so that was like, okay, cool. I got a fact about the house there, and who lives there and stuff like that. And so down the line, we're now getting into the the encounters or experiences because it wasn't. I won't say it's a face to face encounter, Bo, but the things that happen, are for sure amazing, right? That incredible. Because
Yeah.
so one day it's about October, so October 24th. It's getting close to Halloween time, and the rainstorms have come. Uh, things are my in-laws are planning to come and visit us, right? And I remember this week because it had rained, and if we finally got a break in the rain, and I remember just being like, okay, I'm gonna take the kids out, and this was Tuesday, October 24th, and I found this map. I was like, okay, this trail on the map, I wanted to go check out because it looked like it hugged the Smith River, which is a beautiful river there. Can I ride this later, right? Is what I'm thinking. And so we go. And the first thing I noticed is that when we start the hike, the way it was in my head is like we were supposed to take a left, but somehow we ended up going up and around, and we're looped back to where we started. And I'm thinking, whoa, like what did I miss? Because when I looked on the map, we were supposed to take a left and be on a ridge and kind of following this creek. And
Yeah.
when I look, there's a fallen huge tree covering the left that when we came in, I totally missed it. It just looked like you couldn't go over. And so I finally located. I'm with both kids. They're both at this point 2 and 4, so they're young, right? And I'm just like, all right, let's hop over this log, and they're having fun. They're taking forever to jump over the log, and we're hiking slowly, and I'm just looking around, and right away my mind is just thinking like, okay, yeah, this is pretty technical single track. Like if I'm gonna ride this, like I had to kind of, I'm thinking already like I had to go pretty fast, not slow enough, but like fast enough that I'm not gonna like kind of fall off of this. And the whole time there's like on the right there's a mountainside, and then there's a creek kind of and it's dry at this point. It's not filled, but it's dry, and there's ferns. We come around this bend, and I look down into the creek bed, and there's like a little trail, and all the ferns in this area are completely flattened, right? Like, and if you've seen a fern, they're pretty big bushes, and they're flat, like something has been laying there. And I look
Right.
down on this path, and I see a print, a bare footprint, and it's huge, right? I'm thinking like, oh my, and the moment I see it, Bo, I know exactly what I'm looking at. You could see the great toe. You could see, and it's kind of like it's about 15 inches. I went back later to measure, and it was like 15 inches. And I'm excited because right away this was something that at this time I had been listening to Sasquatch Chronicles, but like, and always told myself I believed because it's like I would make that a analogy, like, oh, we're finding things every day in the ocean. What we're kind of silly to think we're not going to find something in the forest, you
Right.
know. So I just thought it was silly to think that this thing couldn't be real, but I also realized, and when I saw that print, that I wasn't really a believer until I saw that, right? And I see that, and I have to go see it. I have to get closer. I have to take a picture. I tell the kids, I'm like, hey, hold hands, wait for me right here. And I jump down into the creek bed. The moment I jump down there, Bo, I am scared. I realize that I'm now it's kind of in its area. I feel like whatever this is, this belongs to them and I shouldn't be here. I look at it and I'm analyzing it and I'm like, am I really looking at what I'm looking at? I count 5 toes. It's huge. And right away it just rained and I'm thinking like, no one is out here. No one is walking around barefoot, right? You're trying to rationalize all
Yeah.
these things. And I take out my phone and I take a picture. The moment I take a picture, I don't want to say it was mind speak or anything like that, but this thought in my head was like, you shouldn't have done that. Get the kids and get out of here. And right away I jump out of there like, like panic almost where like I slipped to get out, because I'm like, oh my gosh. And I get out, grab the kids. My son's like, wait, I thought we were hiking. Like, why are we turning around? I'm like, oh, my adrenaline is flowing, right? Like
Yeah. No
something
doubt,
just
man.
major happened. I'm hearing this. I heard that voice or that thought, and I'm thinking, I need to get out. I need to get you guys out of here. And my son's starting to like kind of like, I don't want to say tantrum, but he's upset that we're turning around because we're all having fun and the vibe. I just completely changed the vibe, right? I'm sure as much as I was trying to keep it together, I'm sure I was letting out some like
Yeah.
we need to get out of here. And I get back, and as I'm loading up the kids, someone and I thought about once I did my notes, I thought about this part of the story after the fact, but someone pulls up behind me, and it's like some Pontiac old kind of car. I'm loading up the kids, and the whole time, one thing that I learned being in this remote area is that I need to make eye contact with whoever I'm engaging with because I'm new here. I just want them to know that I'm like here and that like I mean well, right? I'm no one to worry about. And so I'm waiting for this person to come out. The person that comes out is like this woman. She kind of, not to be mean, but she looks like the wrestler Dusty Rhodes. She has like short, curly hair, just like looks kind of like she had like a rough night, kind of
Yeah.
like haggard, right? And I'm thinking, and the whole time I'm trying to look at her, she's avoiding me. But I see something in her hand, and it looks like a cigarette, which I thought was a cigarette. But as I'm trying to buckle my daughter, I'm kind of double taking. I'm like, trying to get eye contact from her. I'm trying to focus on buckling up my daughter because adrenaline is running. I'm trying to get out of here, but I'm trying to make sure this person is like, I don't know if I have to be like, hey, be careful, or you know what I mean? I'm just waiting for some kind of engagement.
Right.
When I look back at her, what I thought was a cigarette, now I see is like some kind of incense or something, and she's moving her hand around her vehicle like this, as if she's smudging. That's the first thought that comes to my head is like, whoa,
Yeah.
she's like, what is this? And then as I like tighten my daughter, I look, she's on the opposite side now of her car, and I'm just like, I need to get out of here. I get in the car. I don't want to say runs, but she hustles back to her car, gets in, follows me. And at this point now, I'm like thinking, whoa. I'm like my blood is like really going and I'm just like, oh my gosh, she's following me and right away whatever my thoughts were is witch. The word witch keeps coming into my head.
Oh.
I'm like, it's a witch,
Yeah.
it's a witch. And I'm thinking like the office for the state park is coming up on my left. If she pulls in, I'm gonna confront her. Like this is I'm not gonna allow this.
Right.
And I take a left. As I take a left, she's on me. Like she's not giving me space. And as I take a left, she just goes straight, right? And I go into the parking lot. I park. I turn off the car because I need to get my gearing together. I'm like freaking out, and I'm telling myself like, dude, holy cow, right? I'm trying to think about what just happened and what that meant with that lady following me. And yeah, and my kids are like, "What are we doing here? You know, like, what's the plan?" I'm like, "Okay, haha," and I'm just kind of like, I gotta get home. The whole time as we get home, I know that I'm not myself. I'm just kind of pacing. I'm kind of like trying to my wife to get home so I don't want to text her and say, "Hey, this is what happened," and I'm waiting
Mhm.
for her to come home so I can be like, "Will you come back with me to that area? I need to measure it. I need to like look at this. I need to make sure what I saw was real." I told her, and she's like, "I'm not going anywhere." Right? She's like, "What do you? No, it's already getting dark. Like, let's just eat dinner. I just got home from work. Like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, calm down." And so finally, I calmed down. Right? I'm like, okay, like all that just, I don't know what that was, but I'm counting the days. The next day happens to rain all day again. I know my in-laws are about to get here the next day. They come. This is now the 26th. They get there. Um, hey, we want to go on a hike. I'm like, I know exactly where to take you guys. I took him back to that area, right? I had to go back, Bo. I had to go
Yeah,
back, and
dude.
this time I had my measuring tape on my belt. I'm like, I'm gonna go because I know what I saw was at least 15 to 20 inches. Like that was my rough estimate. We get to the area, and I jump down, and my father-in-law was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I just want to look at something. I'm trying to like be as calm, cool, and collected as I can." And I measure it, and I could still see the outline of what I had seen 2 days prior, but the rain had completely washed away any kind of detail of the toes. But I can see, and it was definitely 15, 16 inches, right? So I'm just thinking like, holy cow, this thing is was a juvenile, if not like, just from the things I had heard, and with the chronicles, right? People will eventually say so many same similarity things of what they saw, what they felt, what they experienced, that's where I started to believe like there's something to this. I don't know what it is, but not you can't say that this person in Pennsylvania and this person in Oregon and this person in California, they're all saying this kind of the same stuff. So once again, my whole mind at this point is completely shooken up, and I'm just thinking like, oh man, and that weekend happened to be a full moon and my in-laws rented an Airbnb in a nicer part of the actual city. We're on the outskirts of like the redwoods, so we go stay with them. And the whole time I can't really think. I just want to be out there and like kind of like figure out what this means. And it was let me see the 30th. It was Monday morning, and that day we were actually going to leave that house because it actually, with all the rain, we started to notice that there was a really big mold problem in that whole area. It's so moist and wet all the time that it doesn't dry out enough. And this house in particular, like mold was happening in the bathroom, and when you would come in after a hike, you would just smell mildew. It was really bad. My wife couldn't handle it, so we ended up finding another spot. So that day on Monday, when she's gonna get home, we're gonna move out. But that morning, I woke up with this complete change of heart, and I'm completely at this point I'm just proclaiming God. Not Jesus yet, but I'm saying God is real because the thought that downloaded was, if this thing is real, what I just saw in the woods or this footprint that left this thing, I'm being told it's not real, it doesn't exist. Yet I saw evidence. So God put the download of like it's the same with me, right?
Wow.
People are going to say, I'm not real, but there's evidence all around, and this is it. And right away in my heart, I was like, whatever this thing is, God created it. That's like what I knew. And so I start proclaiming, I believe that there is a God. And this is the beginning of my testimony is that because of I saw this footprint, that's all I needed to see for God to show himself, for me to be like, oh my gosh, everything we've been told is a lie, right? And this, once again, this validates a lot of conspiracy theories, right? It's like they're telling us these things are fake or whatever, but there's truth in it. They're telling us Bigfoot isn't real, yet I see a footprint in the middle of this, and the highway's right there. But this is a rugged mountainous area. It's
Right.
super close to the Smith River. Because of that Smith complex fire, it burned up their whole habitat, Bo. This is later what I put together is that acres got burnt. So they were more prominent once again in Crescent City, the town that year when I was there, because their actual areas were so burnt because of what happens next, right? I'm thinking like, why did this happen? Are they really always this close? And we've heard stories where, yeah, they come into neighborhoods, they go into areas, right? Um, but I believe because of the Smith complex fire burning so many acres of their area of their home, they were actually more prominent and more present in the little town, and that's how I got these experiences. So I proclaim God. I call my mom. I call my dad. I'm like, I tell them what I felt. My dad chuckles. He's like, "Are you kidding me?" But he's happy as a clam, right? He's like, "Dude, yes, like I've been praying for this day. God is real. I've been telling you this
Yes.
your whole life." My mom is like, "Amen. Yes, God is real." These are things they've always known for themselves because of their testimonies that I shared earlier. But now I'm finally saying God is real.
Yes.
Um, so hallelujah. I come in that night. So we move into the new house. I call my parents that morning, tell them I believe in God, that God is real. We move into the new house. I'm just still processing the all the events of the week. That night, the kids sleep with my wife in the main room. The bed isn't big enough for me, so we still haven't figured out how we're gonna do sleeping arrangements. So I sleep in this room that's facing the front part of the house where this dirt road is. And that morning, and I get waken up feeling like it's an earthquake. I get woken up to the feeling of an earthquake. I shoot up out of bed, Bo, and I thought it was an earthquake because I lived in San Francisco, and there was one time where I got woken up the same way, and it actually the house was shaking. It really, there was a small earthquake, and I felt what an earthquake feels like. So this happens. I wake up, I shoot out of bed, and nothing's shaking anymore. I'm just kind of like, what was that? And right away, I grab my phone thinking like, oh, let me look it up. And then as I'm looking up, right, because I'm completely woken up out of sleep, I'm thinking, well, it's not going to be recorded yet because it just literally happened. The internet's not going to tell me, hey, there was an earthquake in Crescent City. So I laid down. As I laid down, I have this vision, this mental visual of a Sasquatch running down that dirt road that was right where my window was, right where the front of the house was, running full speed across. And that's what that rumbling was, and I shot up out of bed.
Yes.
And that was the first time I'd ever had been woken up like that, like literally shot out of bed, and as I'm laying there, I'm like, I see that in my mind's eye of a Bigfoot running down that street, right where my window is. And I'm just kind of like, I lay down and I'm like, okay, that was weird, right? So that was like kind of a follow up, right? And I think people listening can maybe say, hey, yeah, you were under a lot of stress. A lot of things are happening right now. You just saw a footprint, you saw the witch, you had a dream, or you moved into your new house, and maybe your mind's racing, right? But it was just funny because it wasn't a dream. It was when I laid down, it was just a vision in my mind's eye of what it
Yes.
was that woke me up, almost as if Bigfoot sent it to me to be like, this, it was me, right? That's what woke you up. Um, so the next day, I'm just kind of like walking around the property. I'm just kind of like, and right across the street, there's our neighbor who they happen to know the person who owned the house. They were kind of like the property management essentially, but they had a Bigfoot flag waving out in front of their house, right? And because it's that area, I was quick to be like, oh, it's just the folklore of the area. Of course, everyone's
Right.
gonna have a Bigfoot sticker or a shirt or whatever, but they happen to have a flag, and I hadn't seen the I hadn't met Carlos was actually his name. Funny enough, the husband of Renee who lived there. Um, but Renee was coming over and she was just like, giving us a rundown. And one of her good friends owned the house, but he lived in Michigan, so they were happy that a family was here and this and that. So we're just living life, and so uh, a couple more stories. One night I'm laying there. Now we have the house, the master bedroom figured out. So I'm actually sleeping in the room now with the kids and wife. And there was one little window that we kept open because once again, it was kind of drafty. It's just always kind of kind of that P&W kind of weather where you wanted some breathability or whatever. And I had the window open. And one night I wake up to a single shotgun blast, and it's just like, and right away there's like I wake up out of sleep and I'm thinking, and I hear two sets of whoops, right? And I want to try to do it, but I cannot do it justice. But it was like on the inhale, it was like whoop, whoop, whoop. And as I'm laying there, I knew exactly how it was being done. Like it was on the inhale of the creature when almost like sucking up air and releasing that whoop as the air was filling their lungs is what I heard. And it was so loud. Right after it's done, it was almost like every dog in the neighborhood starts whining, crying, begging their owners to let them in the house. It's this crying of dogs all around. and I'm just completely shook. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I knew exactly what I heard. It almost ingrained, that sound ingrained in my head, that the next morning I wanted to recreate what I just did because I knew exactly how it was done. I don't know how. I just heard it and I knew that's the only way it could be done. And there's no way a human did at the frequency and the force that I heard it, you know? So, and then I look over at my wife because I was like, how did you not hear a shotgun blast, the whoops, and now the dogs? And she's asleep, completely knocked out. And I'm just kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna wake her up. And yeah, so I'm just kind of like, okay, just added another one to the list, right? Because I still don't know what it is that I'm dealing with, right? One day I'm taking the kids to the Yantaket area. There's a bunch of trails and it turns into sandy kind of areas that get you to the ocean, or it's actually where the ocean meets the Smith River. And I took them kind of north, heading more toward the river because the trails were going to be a little easier for their feet. And as I'm walking there, uh, there's just a bag of bread. Like it was like two loaves of bread, but wrapped in like a bigger bag.
Yeah.
And I remember, and it's just out there on the trail. And I'm thinking, what is this? And I'm just thinking, like, trying to, of course, once again, rationalize, right? Being like, did someone drop this on the picnic or what like, why would it? And right away, I think this is an offering.
It's a gift. Yeah.
Someone left this out here for something.
Yeah.
And Bo, later when I went to go look up that picture, because I took a picture because I was gonna show my wife and be like, dude, so what do you think this is? Like a random two loaves of bread out here. This is weird. As I go look at that bread, the name of the bread was Ezekiel 39. Or have you heard of that brand?
No.
Yeah, it was so funny when I looked at the picture. I zoomed in to see what kind of bread it was because I almost was wondering if it was sourdough, but it was like it's called Ezekiel. I don't know if that verse is correct, but it's and Ezekiel essentially tells you how to eat and or how to make bread, and it has those ingredients. This brand makes it like the way that verse in the Bible says. So I don't know. It's called like Ezekiel bread brand, but it's the numbers, and I forget. I want to say it's 39 or 93. Um, but I was just kind of like, oh, like once again, I could totally say that's a coincidence, but it just is funny once again that the bread that they chose was biblical and it was
Yeah.
right, like it happened, and I didn't notice until I just recently tried to look at that photo. Um, and it was also around the Yontaket area, right? So, uh, I just didn't touch it. I just was like, whatever. Once again, we need to get out of here. And it started to become like that on hikes when I would see tree breaks or what I thought were outlines of more footprints. I was starting to get annoyed because I was like, oh my gosh, I keep wanting to bring my kids out here. I keep wanting to enjoy the area, but oh yeah, there's this thing that it essentially is out here. That they they don't want me here, right? It's kind of the vibe. I had tried to hit up my friend who's a ranger, and I sent him the photo of the print to be like, dude, look at this, look what I found, and he never responded to me. He would always avoid the subject. If I brought it up to him in person, he would find some other way. He would tell me that, that there was, that some of the Yurok, that tribe that's actually a couple miles down from the Tolowa, that they believe that, the Bigfoot is this story created to say, hey, we want to be like the masters of our environment, right? Man dreamed to be this creature because we want to be able to jump fast, run fast, and just be an apex predator, and that's why the story was created. And that was like the only time he ever gave me a little bit more, and I was just kind of like, I don't know, man, I'm seeing things, and you work out here, like, how do you not know more, or why aren't you,
Right.
you really don't believe? And he would always he was really good at not giving it attention, not answering, and obviously I didn't want to be a crazy person, so I'm not like, dude, tell me what you know, but that's kind of how I felt on the inside.
Right.
Um, he had actually told me a story about the Smith complex fire because it had, remember I told you we were out of power for 6 days, and the reason why it
Yeah.
taken so long is that not only was it rugged mountainous, terrain, but they actually had tried to do night shifts where people were combating the fire at night. But there was actually, he had heard a story from a couple of the ranger police that they had stopped all night duty because an incident had happened with communications going haywire for a group that was on the mountain fighting the fire, that they had reported seeing lights, crazy lights, and that in the morning that they weren't responding on their radios, and that they were found huddling together, 5 grown men huddling together in a bush, petrified. And so he said that he's like, hey, like he never talked to me about Bigfoot, but he's like, hey, but this did happen, and I can tell you this, and like told me that, and I was like, what? And he's like, that's pretty much why it's taken so long to fight this fire. He's like, they stopped doing night stuff, but the crazy thing is this story that the people had reported seeing lights, their communications and all the things had gone haywire. They couldn't use them, and they were completely terrified and found hunched together, bundled together for safety in this bush. So
Wow.
that was like a story I'd heard later where I was just kind of like, oh gosh, things are happening out here, right? Um, and he had also told me that they had, when they're doing their cleaning and stuff, they had found ritual uh, altars. They had found dead sacrificed things. He said that
Hmm.
witchcraft was really prominent in the area. He would always tell me, don't go to, pretty much all these aspirations I had to ride in the area started to dwindle down because he was like, there's no GPS. There's also like because before marijuana was legal in California, there was all these camps and all these like types of, booby traps set out for people to not find
Yeah.
the crop. And he's like, people go disappearing all the time. People go missing all the time because they fall into these places and no one can hear them. And because the way the mountains are, echoes work different and all this stuff. So he was always like, especially if you're with the kids, like don't go here, don't go there. Always know someone where they're at. Text me if you're going somewhere. And at first I kind of was like, dude, I know what I'm doing, right? But more and more as he kept kind of prompting me, I felt like he knew more than he wanted me to know. But at the end of the day, his job was to just say, hey, I told you not to go there, right? So just listen. And
Yeah.
obviously as a parent, I was like, yeah, I don't want, because I would feel that when I was with the kids. I was like, I need to get out of here, even if it's a mountain lion, right? It's like this
For
is
sure.
feeling something weird. So those were other stories I had heard when I was out there, and then another crazy story was we had two apple trees on the property. One were sweet and one were tart, green apples, and some were red. And Bo, I'm telling you that the trees were booming. There was enough apples to eat the rest of the season. The kids were going out there and just grabbing apples. There was apples rotting on the ground. There was just apples for days. And we were going up to Portland to visit one of my brothers who was graduating college up there. And my wife was like, "Hey, I'm gonna grab some apples for the road while we go." Right? We have like a 6-hour drive. As we were pulling out and we're driving, she's like, "Hey, you know what's weird?" And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "All the sweet apples are gone." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Yeah, there's none. There was none left on the tree. There was none left on the floor. Like, in the bag she had filled was all green apples." And I'm like, yeah, right. I'm like, I'll talk to Renee when we get back. Like, someone came and either harvested or, you know what I mean? Like, there has to be a reason.
Right.
I get back. The moment we get back, I immediately go back to the backyard and I look at the tree and I'm like, oh my gosh, every apple was gone. Every apple that was on the ground was gone. And the way that the yard was, it was so like all the houses out there are pretty secluded. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they make
Hmm.
it very hard to get into your property. And But right away I'm thinking like, okay, was it a herd of elk or bear? I start looking up at how these animals would get things, and they're sloppy. They would have broken limbs, they would have left evidence, they wouldn't have taken every apple. I finally find Renee and I was like, hey, did you come pick apples by chance or anything? She's like, no. She's like, why? I'm like, all the apples are gone. And she's like, there's no way. And I'm like, they're gone. Like, come look. And she comes and looks and she's just like, whoa. And they have their own stories, but you could tell like on her face, she was like, oh gosh, like I know what this was.
Yeah.
Um, and she was like, yeah, and she even said like, like no one can even see your apples from the road, so it's not like people would come in and grab your apples. And I'm thinking like, yeah, exactly. So that was a really bizarre thing that happened because there was just too many apples, and my wife and I, my wife had tried to, she was like, "Oh, I saw birds, they'll eat apples." And I'm like, "Yeah, but once again, they're just pecking at apples and leaving them there. They're not flying away with 1,000 apples." And
Right.
there was one time where my wife had taken out the trash, and it gets completely dark out there. Maybe how it is where you live, it's just
Oh yeah.
when it's nighttime, it's just dark. And she says she heard as she's going to the garbage, she heard like a grunt, like almost like a grunt telling something else that she was coming. and
Mm-hmm.
then that other thing responded with another grunt, and she felt that feeling of dread and just went back into the house. And she like came in, she was like, this just happened. And of course, I think my wife is more like, like I'm not gonna pay too much attention to that stuff, but like, and I was kind of like, whoa, really? Like, tell me more, what happened? And yeah, she was just like, yeah, there was two things out there, and one of them communicated to the other that I was coming, and she like knew that, right? So there is
Right.
this like kind of intuitive mind speak component to it all, where you can internalize or like interpret what they're doing
Yep.
and saying somehow, The the I think the last thing that happened, Bo, and this was like the where I actually saw something was um oh well actually before I get to that, or actually I can get to that, but so I'm on a bike ride with one of my buddies, and this was another buddy who my wife Alyssa, had met his girlfriend at the hospital. So, and he was an athletic guy. He loved to run, hike. He was living in that area because of all the adventuring and recreational stuff you could do. And he was into riding bikes, but not at like my level. But he was athletic, so we could do tough rides and like do big rides together. And so we went and we rode around Yontocket area because there's a bunch of trails out there. We kind of we do a loop, and then we take this one creek trail that takes us to the backside of that scientist's house that I had mentioned earlier, right? So we're now on the backside of his house where this gate ends, and you could see his house from there. And of course, because I'm a big bike guy, I'm like, okay, I need to get all the miles I can, so I'm gonna ride all the way to the gate. My buddy stops like the moment we get down in this like, it's kind of almost like a turnaround kind of area at this gate. But I want to touch the gate because I just want to get whatever, maximize my miles as much as possible. As I get to the gate, I hear something splashing in the creek. And as I'm hearing the splashing, I look and I see something big and brown through the trees. And right away, my head is like, oh, it's an equestrian, right? Because I've seen them at this place all the time. Um, and they're fast, right? Before you know it, they're on you, or they're right. He's coming up to the gate. They're going through the creek, and they're going to come up this gate. And and I'm looking back at my buddy too, and he's coming up and he's talking to me about which way to go next. And at the same time, I'm thinking like, oh, it must be the scientist guy that lives there. He's on this horse and he's coming up, because why would someone be on his side of the property, right? Like that's not allowed, essentially.
Right.
So when I glance back, because I'm expecting at this point for the equestrian to already be visible on the trail heading towards the gate. I look, and whatever that brown thing is now standing still, and it's just completely still. And it was brown. I don't want it. It was brown, and I can only imagine that it was wet fur, because it wasn't fluffy and it wasn't like dangling, but it was compressed against the skin, right? So I thought it was still the horse. And
Right.
I'm thinking like, oh, this guy is annoyed that we're here, and he probably doesn't want to come out because he's just doing his own thing, and but I don't see a human. I just see this big brown thing through the trees, and it's now frozen, and it's not. I look at my buddy, and he's still talking to me about which way we should go next, and I'm almost kind of like, I'm hinting at like, hey, someone's coming though, and he never picks up on it, right? And at the time, I'm just thinking like, okay, that guy's annoyed that we're here, and he's just waiting for us to leave so he can carry on. So whatever, I want to finish the bike ride, I leave. As I get home, I start thinking more about what I just experienced, right? Because I'm like, that is so weird. Like, and then because later we see an actual equestrian, I'm like, if it was a horse, they're noisy, they move. This thing was completely, I don't know what kind of horse person would just keep their animals still hiding. Like, and I didn't see a person, right? And my friend also didn't see what I heard, the splashing, and didn't see anything either. And he didn't even pick up, it wasn't on his radar at all. And I even asked him later, I'm like, hey, did you see that horse? And he's like, what horse? And I was just kind of like, all right, never mind, right? Because at the, that's the funny thing about all this stuff is like, I wish in the moment I would have been like, hey, who are you? Gotten the attention of it, but I know that whatever I saw didn't want to be seen, and I had seen it. And it was like the side of it, like almost like the arm, or, I didn't see any creases, but it was brown, kind of like wet fur, is what I would imagine.
And big. Obviously
And big.
big.
Yeah, and big, right? And so later, I think about what I'm talking. I text my buddy, who told me about that house originally. I'm like, hey, does does the scientist that live in that house, does he ride horses? Or does he have a horse? And he's like, no, why? And then I'm like, because I think I saw him riding a horse out there, and he's like, dude, he has a neck injury. He wouldn't like he's had like a neck injury. He wouldn't be on a horse. There's no horses that live over there. And I'm just kind of like, whoa. And then after that, I just didn't talk to him anymore or didn't add to the conversation because I was just like, oh, I know what that was then, right? Like I just saw an actual physical thing. And and so yeah, and then so finally I meet Carlos, who was the Nate Renee's husband across the street, and he tells me that he's been studying. He had a Sasquatch experience in Seattle or in Washington when he was in his 20s going to school up there. That he pretty much moved to the area from Southern California to be in that area to investigate this matter. That he's working on a documentary that all this stuff, and I started telling him about what I'd been doing, right, and or what I'd been experiencing. And he was like, "Oh yeah," and we finally one day linked together to talk, and he wanted to record my experiences, but we ended up just talking about so much that like I remember we just didn't, and I didn't follow up, and but he was also talking a lot more about like C5 kind of stuff, or
Yep.
that practice where you call
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
lights and
CE5.
stuff. Yeah, and he
Yeah.
was kind of pushing that on me a little bit, where I just was kind of like, and I was at this point really trying to say, hey, this led me to Jesus, and stuff like that. Um, and so I never that nothing much more came of that other than just like a friendship and kind of that similar stuff. But he got really called in. He is really into the C5 practice and like kind of believes and gives a lot of energy to that. But which brings me back to my testimony. So after all these, during these experiences, I'm spending a lot of time. I just want to know at this point who Jesus was, right? And when I had told my dad, "Hey, I'm proclaiming God. I believe God is real," I still at this point don't know who Jesus is. Don't know the power of the name really. And he's like, "I want you to read God." He's like, "You should start." I'm like, "I don't even have a Bible." I downloaded the Bible app. I'm thinking, where do I start? How do I do this? I'm on fire for God, right? And I'm trying to figure out what to do. And he's like, "You need to read the Gospel of John. Start there."
Yes.
And I
Yes.
read the Gospel of John, and I start to know who Jesus is, and I'm just like, "Whoa." And I'm just blown away by the gospel and by I'm finally reading, and what Jesus says, like, for those who have ears, let them hear. That is resonating with me. And as I start, John is the last gospel in the Bible, and so I go back to Matthew. And when I'm reading, and it comes to Matthew 4, uh, chapter 14, verse 31, and it's when Peter goes out into the water and he sees Jesus. And he's like, "Can I come out?" And he's like, "Yeah." And as he comes out, he's doing it, and then he, you know, essentially starts to sink, asks Jesus to save him. And right when I'm reading, "Oh thou little faith, why did you doubt?" It was as if Jesus spoke directly to me. I completely just felt that warmth. I started to bawl. I remember my kids are in front of me, and I'm just worried that they're gonna turn around and see me crying like a baby, right? But the whole time as I'm crying, I remember like mouthing the word like "wow," like he's real, and I just heard him, and it was as if I was Peter walking out, and he was talking to me about my whole life, like, why did you doubt? And it was just so powerful. And at that moment, I couldn't get enough of Jesus. I knew that Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life. I knew that through him, I was going to learn more about everything, right? And I just was on fire. I read the Gospels probably over and over again for a minute before I read the rest of the New Testament, and God is so good once again because I just was able to realize so much and let go of so much. I surrendered my children a couple of days later, which was the second time that I felt the Holy Spirit, where he just, once I released them, I said, "I surrender them in your name, that these are your children, they belong to you. You are the true father. I'm just their steward, their shepherd here on earth. I can't even be called a father." It was these downloads and these thoughts from Jesus himself that was so powerful, and I was able to do that, right? And then there was a time where I surrendered my guilt and my shame to him. And again, the same thing, the Holy Spirit filled me and I released it all and cried and knew that he was my true father. All those daddy issues that I had had, all those times that I was by myself and wondering why my life was that, he took it all away and said, "Hey, I've always been your father. I was always with you." And it was that powerful. And I remember the first thought after that that time when I released my shame and guilt about all the things I had done and how I was so straight away. He said, "Call your grandma and ask for forgiveness. You don't, she doesn't have to give it to you. It's a gift. Forgiveness is a gift, and you just need to ask her for that. Because as much as you know that there's pain and suffering, and I forget, and I prayed and said the name of the person who had done those things in my family, and I forgave him, and these are things that I didn't let that anger and that all that stuff take over, and he took it all away, right? And this is in the middle of all these experiences that I'm having. And so once again, it was just incredible that I had three encounters as well with this Holy Spirit. And before that, I had no idea that, right? I'd known that because of the Bigfoot print that God was real, but now I'm meeting his son and he's telling
Yes.
me that he is the King of Kings and all that, right? And I'm feeling him in the Holy Spirit and I'm able to do these things that I never thought. And once again, he was so good and gracious that he even gave me a couple more weeks to be like, all right, you're now going to quit marijuana. That's the next thing. You can finish that jar that you have because at this point I'm still trying to like smoke and read scripture a little bit. I'm realizing
Yeah.
really quickly like this can't, you can't serve two masters, right? Like this is one or the other. And Jesus like, but you finish that, and now you'll be clean off of that. So it's almost been in February, it'll be 2 years I'll be off marijuana as
Thank the
well.
Lord, man.
So all these things, right? And I'm real, and I was realizing quickly that, that God, his plan, not only did it really start in 2023 with that tree falling on the house and me getting sober off alcohol and changing, but it had been from the moment of conception, from the moment that my mom was praying in the womb that I was going to be his, it all came true, right? It all came into fruition one way or another. And he let me stray away for a long time. And he let me dabble in so much. And he let me learn through those experiences that, okay, you're never going to get fulfilled until you meet me, into this, right?
Amen.
And for the longest, I thought this was a Bigfoot experience, but no, this is a testimony of his love, of how he shows up and how he uses the things, right? Um, we ended up only living in Crescent City for 7 months. Again, 7 years in the house in Sacramento, 7 months in Crescent City. It was completed. We were now back in Sacramento, and he was like, "How? This is now your life. I have breathed something new into you. What are you gonna do now?" And of course, I came back. I was, trying to find myself in the community, linking up with old friends, and trying to tell people a little bit of what happened. I felt like the Bigfoot story was a good way to, because I was still, I don't want to say I was embarrassed. Oh, speaking of embarrassing, God also, me being able to, when I didn't even know how to talk to my kids about God, right? I was embarrassed. I didn't know how to even say Jesus. I didn't know how to pray. These were things that I prayed for and asked God to help me with, and the how fast He was able to do that for our family was incredible. Because before that, we were so lost, right? We were Jesus was not a name we were using, and right away the kids were curious to know who he was as well once they knew I was talking about him. But I remember that feeling of being like, where do I start? How do I pray? I was embarrassed to say the name Jesus in front of them because I didn't know how to answer who when they were going to ask questions. And so I used the power of prayer and asked God to help me with that. And right away, as I was meeting his son, as I was reading scripture, he was helping me be that person for the family and start bringing us back out of darkness, right? And started to be like, and now the kids, at one point my son was saying the Lord's Prayer every night for all of us in bed, right? Like those are just things that are amazing that God did, as me being a steward for his children, like those are that's incredible. right? And I couldn't have done this alone. Like, I try to think all the time when people are like, oh, well, you just want this, right? You just want to believe this and all that stuff. Like, if that's the argument, but I'm like, I'm telling you, there's no way I would have, the way my life was going, this isn't me. I didn't do this alone. This is God given. This is like God's guidance. This is God's will being fulfilled through me. And so coming back to SAC, I was trying to figure out that as well with the community, trying to express, and using the Bigfoot to break the ice about how I came to God, and really, even when I apologized to my grandma, I was talking to her in Spanish, but I said, I was lost, but now I'm found. I was, and in Spanish, it's something I'd heard before. There's a couple of songs and worship songs in Spanish, and it had made so much sense. Um, and so it's one of those things where it's like I try to I like saying I'm saved. I like saying I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I like saying that He called me. I like saying that He elected me. I like to say that He gave me ears to ear. Because it all happened at once, right? And I don't
Yes.
know how to really refer to it all the time, but I just know that now all I want is a relationship with Jesus, right? And I wish someone would have just said that, right? Instead of, as I remember as a kid, I remember being fearful of heaven and hell and stuff, and or just making it to heaven. But really, I think the goal is to have a relationship with Jesus where He knows you. He knows you by name, right? He knows who you are, and that's what I'm trying to do now for my family. And still He's working through us every day, right? And so coming back, uh, there was like a buddy that I was really close with in the cycling community, and he had a cycling group called Jumbo Satanica, and it was like a play on this actual Tour de France team that we all like. But of course, everything in the secular world, like 666 and devil horns, like throwing up the symbol on your hand, and anything is punk rock, right? Like
Right.
that kind of vibe is so easy, and I was guilty of it too, right? I was like, oh yeah, like if you can get 666 as a racing number, cool, and yeah, throw the devil horn every time you take a picture on your bike, and I had prayed for this individual because I knew in my heart I was like, well, I don't want nothing to do with that, but he's a dear friend of mine, and how do I do it? Let me just pray, and slowly but surely he came on his own accord and said, hey, I'm no longer gonna use that name. I feel like I'm being pigeonholed with this like devil stuff. And he's like, and he changed the name to Bikes Are Really Fun, which the acronym is BARF, which isn't a better one at all, but it's still like at least positive, and it has nothing to do with the devil. And I felt like that was my answer, my prayer being answered through
Absolutely.
it. I ended up taking a bike shop job in Old Sacramento. It's like right here on the waterfront, and I would ride in, and every day there was this church on the corner, and I just would always wonder, like, and of course I went through my own season of I don't need to go to a church, right? Like I'm just gonna read the Bible at my house. I'm just connecting with
Right.
Jesus. I don't need anybody else because I think I'm still dealing with a little bit of the church hurt, and like I don't want to be, around people that, I don't know. I was making all sorts of excuses, but one thing came very clear, that I had to just release it to Jesus and ask Him for guidance on that. Like whatever you want me to do, that's what's next for me. So I prayed a lot on that. But that church, has another location here closer to my house, and when I would ride into work, I would see one of their earlier services were ending, and I was going in. I would work Sunday, Monday, and run the shop solo. So I was like on my way to work, I wasn't gonna stop, but I was always curious. Um, and then there was always Jehovah's Witness standing on the corner, and then there was like Mennonites would come through sometimes and like sing their hymns, like and I was trying to like uh, I was just trying to pray, right, and like ask God like to put me in the lives of people who needed to hear my testimony or the gospel, and then put me in people's lives that, or vice versa, right? Put people in my life that needed to tell me something. And a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses came, and this was after I came to the house, but this was after a night after I had prayed, hey, put someone in my life that needs to hear the gospel. And sure enough, like my wife, I think went to go get coffee or with the kids, and so no one was here. And I hear bang, bang, bang on the door. I open it, and it's Jehovah's Witness, right? And I'm just
Oh,
thinking like, okay. And of course, like I mean, the old me would have just been like, hey, no, not interested, closing the door. So I answered, what's up, and let them tell me what they were talking about. And they come on strong with, certain things. And I just felt like, they started asking me if I even read the Bible or what do I think about the state of the world. And I was just like, I'm saved by Jesus Christ, and slowly but surely started to like, talk to them about the gospel. And I could tell that I don't want to say they got uncomfortable and left, but I think they saw that I was pretty secure in my foundation and they
Yeah,
moved on,
man.
right? But it was just a way that God answered my prayer. And then I actually had two run-ins with the Mennonites, and these were actually pleasant where one of them asked me, she's like, oh, have you heard of the Bible? Do you read the Bible? I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, I would always say I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. And then she would be like, and this happened twice, but she would say, well, that's all that matters. And she was like, have a great day. And she would like walk away. And I was just like, you know what? I'm like, the Mennonites kind of, I would say to the untrained eye, they look like a Amish or something,
Yeah.
right? But and then one day I saw them again, and I was like, "Oh, you guys singing hymns today?" And they're like, and it was one of the men, and he was just like, "Oh yeah," and he's like, "How's your day going?" He's like, he gives me a pamphlet, and I'm like, "Oh yeah," and he's like, "How's your relationship with God?" I'm like, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ," and he's like, "That's all that matters," and he walked away, and I was just kind of like, and it was kind of this perspective of like, I think this is incredible because that's all that matters really, right?
It
And
is,
he
dude.
knows that. And even though he's practicing some, they're trying to live by scripture and they're doing their own, God's doing his will through them. It was kind of reaffirming that I had to be around people that already thought the same way, right? Because then it's this community, So I eventually kept praying, and right now, Bo, since I think we talked like there's been a couple of times where I started going to that church that was on the corner. Their second location is closer to my house, so we've been going. And the first time we went, it was the worship was just powerful. I'm letting tears run down my eyes. I'm feeling the Holy Spirit. And there is this worship song that I hadn't heard, but they played it in the beginning and then at the end. Um, and when we got in the car as we're leaving, the worship station comes on, K-Love, and that song's on the radio, and I'd never had heard it before. And I'm just like, whoa, like what a cool confirmation, that God was like,
Yeah, man. What
you
song
should
was
be
it?
here. I
Ah.
wish I could tell you. I know. I don't know the name, but it's saying, I don't even want to butcher it, man. But it was, I'll email you once I know what it was.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a great song. And it's catchy, and it's talking about the lungs, like, oh gosh, I wish I
Was it
knew. I wish.
Gratitude?
Nah, by Brandon Lake. Nah, no, but that song was instrumental, because right when I was like really diving deep with Jesus when I was in Crescent City, I found The Chosen, right? And they had done, and I got into it, right? Because I just wanted to know more about the apostles, right? And that was all reaffirming and reassuring to me that, man, these people died for what they believed and what they saw, right? And like talk about sticking
Yeah.
to your guns, right? Talk about truth, because who would do that? Who would go through what the apostles did for the gospel, right? And if that isn't enough proof for people, man, I don't think they know what they're reading yet, or because that story alone is amazing. But they had done like a winter like episode or something like that where Brandon Lake came on, Phil Wickham, and I yeah, their Christmas special, and like I remember the kids watched the kids choir sing "What Child Is This," and like we were all just captivated. And at this time, I'm still listening to secular music, right? And we had to take my wife to the airport, and it was like a stormy drive home, and I have the kids. I'm gonna be alone with the kids for 4 days because someone in her family had died. And I remember like thinking like, how am I gonna get home? This is pretty sketchy. The kids are like in the back seat, and I just found the message on X Sirius radio, and it's his worship songs. And I really didn't know any of them at the time, but just this common peace that came over me, and I felt like that's, and since then I just only listen to worship music, really. I'm trying to get better at not kind of branching out from the pop stuff that's on K-Love, but I mean, it's also good, because it just speaks of God and all the praise and glory, But yeah, that was incredible. One thing I forgot to mention is we went back, we moved back in the spring of 24 to Sacramento, but we actually went back to Crescent City, uh, in August again. We were just, once we had left, we're like, oh man, we really miss it. Let's go back for a vacation, and we ended up going back and we got to stay in the same house. Renee was telling us that, no one was living in it, so we could stay there if we wanted. We were only going to be there for like 4 days. And so the first morning that I wake up there, I have this dream of this room that I was sleeping in. The the window led to the backyard where you could see both of those apple trees I was talking about. And the dream that I had was a Bigfoot is hiding behind the sweet apple tree and his head's poking out and he comes out and he's walking towards the window where I'm sleeping. It's almost like sleep paralysis, right? Where I know I'm sleeping, but this Bigfoot in the window's open and he's kind of lurking behind the apple tree that all those apples were gone from. He comes to the window and he's like looking in at me, and I wake up from that dream to this feeling of which I thought was my wife, somebody leaning down on me and holding me, right? And so when I wake up, like fully awake, I realize no one's there, and I get up and no one's even in the house. They had gone out to get breakfast, and I'm just thinking like, whoa, what the heck was that? Right? Because I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel, it literally felt like my wife's touch. It felt like someone holding me gently, but it's connected to this dream of a Bigfoot coming up, right? I tell my wife the moment she gets home, she has coffee, and we're just talking about it. She's like, dude, that's so weird. And then she goes out to the back deck and she's like, hey, Carlos, come out here. And I'm like, and I go out. And the night before we had walked around the backyard and there was this shovel. It was our shovel that we had left there because we were doing our own composting. So we got it back and it was still there. And we had leaned it against this I don't know, this bamboo bush that was growing back there. And what she was showing me was that the shovel that we had put up was now laying down, but there was an arrow laying across it like an X. And she's like, what the heck is this? And I'm just thinking like weird because right away I'm thinking like, okay, someone shot an arrow. They're practicing archery because it said Easton on it. It wasn't like a handmade
Right.
wooden arrow. It's like an archery
Hunting.
arrow and
Yeah.
it says Easton on it. And I'm thinking, what? Someone threw it? I take a picture. I send it to Carlos because I'm like, dude, does anyone around here do archery? I'm like, look what I found this morning. And he's like, dude, that's so weird. He's like, nobody does archery around here. And he's like, and the way that's the way it's the way the direction is like it would have to have been a shot from like the west side, and those are like old people that the block is really small. And it was just such, once again, I don't want to say it's a coincidence because it's just like I had that dream, I had that feeling. Now the shovel we had put up is down, and someone had rested or something had rested that arrow, almost like a
Yeah.
gift, being like, welcome back, right?
Wow.
So that day, I bring my bike and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go ride the south side of Yontaket area, and I kind of want to go back to where I saw the horse, quote unquote, through the trees. I need to go back to that area. I need to go back into that and just see what happens this time, right? And I go and I'm riding and nothing happens, and I find the spot and I'm just trying to relive that moment and being like, yeah, that's weird. It was right there. That thing is huge, blah blah blah. I come back around and I see this trail that's all sand, and I'm thinking like, oh, this will take me back to where I parked my car, and it's a new trail I've never gone down. So I'm like, let me just go down this, but it's so sandy that I can't ride on it. So I'm walking my bike, and as I start coming down, I start hearing something humongous break through the bush, the tree line, and the way it sounds. I'm like looking up, like this thing is huge, and I'm almost thinking maybe elk even, but I'm just thinking like the way elk they roll in mass herds and they're just what I mean, like they're not just coming out of the wood line, like they're already in like kind of meadows and stuff like that. And as I'm walking, I kind of stop and it's on the brink of coming out and showing itself. And once again, I have this thought where it's like, if you're ready, I'm gonna come out. And right away, I just turned around. I was like, nope. And I said, no, I'm not ready. And I walked back out of there, and that feeling of dread because it was fearful, and I was just kind of like, what? I don't know what that was, but why am I feeling fear, and how did I know that it was telling me it was about to show itself? And I
Yeah.
ride back to the car, and I just get out of there, and I'm thinking that thing was huge. I told my wife again, and she was like, dude, like you have a connection, whatever. And then I told Carlos, that neighbor, and he's like, yeah, these things will like imprint on you and they'll know you and like all like he goes deeper into it. I'm just kind of like, and then I started to think more about what is this, right? Because I'm starting to think that we know there's a supernatural component to Bigfoot, and now that I've experienced it, because I've heard it, seen evidence of print, I've seen it through the trees, I've had dreams about it, I've felt it now, where it was cloaked or it was in a different realm, but I felt it hug me, and it's gifting things. It took apples. What does this all mean? And God, I think, allowed me to discern that I think two things could be true at once. I think that this thing could be a living, breathing animal that God did create and is here. But I also think the enemy knew my thoughts, knows what I would tolerate and what I would allow, and used this to still try to separate me from God. Once it knew that I was getting closer to Him, that I was gonna change sides and start being a warrior for Jesus, that this was how he was going to try to lure me back and try to confuse me or try to use it, if anything, to scare me. Because that day when I turned around on my bike, I felt fear. And I felt almost guilt about not calling on the name of Jesus to help me through that moment, or not to like say, hey, but I think I'm being a little too hard on myself, where I'm like, no, I think that was the enemy saying, upset with me, right? And then, or even trying to confuse me by saying, "Oh, I'm your wife. I'm gonna hug you. I'm
Mhm.
gonna touch you, and you're gonna not know it's me, but it's me. It's the enemy." And so right away, I try to go biblically about it, right? And then that's where I started to read. Like I read the book of Yasher, and it talks more about, um, Esau and the battle with Nimrod, right? And if you read that and you see the details about that battle, it
Yep.
sounds like he battled the Bigfoot. It sounds
Yep.
like it was like Esau, if anything, sure was a giant, was a Nephilim maybe. But and right, we always, I think, in the Chronicles, right, there's people that do believe that Sasquatch are Nephilim or remnants of giants, and I don't know, but I think that that's what my overall perspective had changed from a living, breathing animal. When I saw the print, I was like, oh yeah, this thing's eating apples. This thing is leaving footprints. This thing is whooping in the middle of the night. This thing's an animal, right? But then slowly but surely with spiritual warfare, I think the enemy uses that, right? Just how it probably uses aliens or things in the sky. Because after that, God changed my perspective too on like everything that I thought science was. It's like, I don't want to say like that I believe there's a firmament. I believe that that we are the center of the universe because God created us. I believe, there's things that you start to understand, and then, sometimes people will say, well, why? Why would they come up with all these crazy theories and all this scientific stuff? I'm like, to separate you from God, right?
Yeah. Just take
Because if
your
we
eyes off the
all
Lord, man.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
bro.
that's where I'm at with the Bigfoot stuff, and like really, and I'm just, that's why I said like Bigfoot led me to Jesus, because at the end of the day, it's a testimony of God's love my whole life. And now, as of late, I've been reflecting, going back where he's telling me, yeah, I was there when your kids were born. You didn't see me. You didn't, I was there. That's why they were safe. I was there when you fell. I was there in the pool. I was there when you almost stabbed your eye out. I was there every time, right? And I loved you so much that I knew it was a matter of time before you heard the call, right? And so now, just all these confirmations I get with writing to you, about telling this story, um, and letting, hopefully someone's out there that needs to hear the connection between supernatural and Jesus, because it's all intertwined, right? Um, you know, if you're not comfortable with spiritual warfare, I think spiritual conflict, is another way to say it. There's something's happening, and it's happening from the day you're born to choose a side, right? But Jesus loves you, God loves you, and it really comes down to like this moment, and because even in my own family, I want people to have a testimony, right? I want them to hear Jesus's touch, or hear Jesus' call and feel His touch, and it's all in God's timing, right? And so God is still working through me. I'm finding this church. I'm trying to immerse myself in a community where people already know the power of the name of Jesus, right? I'm trying to use cycling as a way to pray and to connect with Jesus, and not just for ego boosting and fitness and stats and data and all that. Like I'm trying to really become a warrior for Jesus. And I've had I know we're probably getting long on time, but I've had a couple dreams, where when with all this, I had like a really good friend of mine, the friend who married us. I've dreamed about her twice, where we're in some kind of like catastrophic environment, and she's like, "What do we do? What do we do?" The first dream, and I just said, "You just got to believe in Jesus," right? And then the dream ends. I had a dream recently where I'm just talking to her and telling her all the good things Jesus has done for me. There was a dream where, because we all sleep together as a family, my son's laying next to me, and in the dream, we got abducted, right? Like almost like we got abducted, and we're in this room, and right away I'm praying in the name of Jesus, and there's like this hybrid creature child thing, and I put my hand on it, and I remember it just had like big black eyes. I don't want to say it looked like a gray, but it almost looked like a fly or something. And I put my hands on it, I pray for it in the name of Jesus, and right away I grab my son, and this portal looking thing sucks us back, and we're like the dream is over. And
What?
the more I think about spiritual warfare, we know something's happening when we sleep, right? And I just know that
Yeah, dude.
in those dreams, I was like any dream that I can have where I'm proclaiming the name of Jesus is incredible because I had never done that until now. And the last dream I had was I was in this white room with three girls in white clothing, and I'm like, well, let me tell you what Jesus has done for me, and just telling them story after story. Like that's how the dream was, and that was it, right? But these dreams where I get to proclaim Jesus's names, and that one where with my son where we were for sure abducted, and I'm panicking kind of, but like not panicking, but more like I know what I need to do. I need to rebuke this in the name of Jesus and pray for this hybrid child thing over here. I put my hand on it and prayed for it in Jesus' name, and we got sucked out of there. Like those are powerful things that and then they stay with you because like some dreams just like
Yep.
kind of disappear and you don't remember really, but those ones have always stayed with me. And so I mean, yeah, just incredible stuff, Bo. And like I said, God has been slowly revealing certain things to me. I ask every day to just use me, to fulfill His will. I still have a lot of work to do. I'm not talking like I have all the answers. I don't want that to come off like that. All I know is that Jesus is Lord, right? And He's done a lot of good things for me. I went from a completely new age, separate, pushing Him away, denouncing His name, uh, and sometimes mocking Him when I would play music, to now being completely saved and loved and knowing that it's all because of Him. So, hallelujah, amen, praise the Lord.
Amen, brother. Amen. And you do have all the answers. There's only one answer, and you got it.
Good,
Christ is
good
Lord.
call.
That's
Good
it.
call, man. Yeah, hallelujah to that.
Man, bro, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, man. Uh, my only the only part throughout this whole story uh was I wish you would have went and knocked on that scientist's door and be like, "Hey, I'm only here for 4 days. I don't care if you get mad. I got questions." You know what I mean?
Right,
Oh,
right.
buddy. But man,
Yeah.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and uh, I'm interested on. I want to hear back from you because in about half an hour I have an episode dropping for the week,
Hmm.
and I'd like for you to listen to it. I'm going to be a guest on somebody else's show, is what this episode is, and we get into all kinds of spiritual stuff, and I touch I touch on Bigfoot, and I would love to hear what you think about it after you listen to it.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think it goes right in line with your experiences and how it can be both physical and spiritual, and how the enemy could use it as well. And but Carlos, this has been such a wonderful talk, man. You're a very interesting person, and if you wrote a book about your life, I would read it. So
Right on, man.
I don't know if you've ever considered doing that, but I think you have a cool story, man. Like your adventures, you're you're interesting, man. Like you're captivating. I
Right.
think it's
Well,
been great, and to hear how it comes to now that you're walking in Christ. I just I love it, man. I really appreciate having you on here.
No, yeah, bro, that means a lot. Thank you. Yeah, like again, I just want to say that this story ultimately is about Jesus, right? And what he's done for me. Um, and yeah, like I said, I think God brought me to you, to your podcast, because your content is so good in terms of like there's these things happening, but at the end of the day, you can get caught up listening to, Sam Tripoli and all these other people who are like-minded individuals, but the overall message isn't Jesus. And I think that's really what we're missing overall, and that's all I really strive for nowadays is to fill that in my cup, because until it overflows, because it's I've lived so long without it that and sometimes I feel, and Jesus has even told me like a couple times, like, chill, you're doing the right thing, like just keep believing in me, like, because I want it, right? I almost have like a frenzy urgency about it where I feel like time's running out. I don't
Yeah.
want to get into doomsday stuff or anything like that, but like it feels like something, or I don't know if this is just comes with the territory once you understand that there is spiritual conflict and you're on essentially the winning side of Jesus, and you know that
Absolutely.
there's a lot of people that aren't, and you're worried for them. At least I am, for my family, for friends, for people that in this whole world, really, right? And you're just kind of like, man, and it's amazing because Jesus told us this. You read the gospel, he tells us like, and all this stuff has been happening biblically, and that's really where I try to get a lot of my information or cross reference, right? Whenever I'm thinking about something. Yeah, I felt like my whole life I felt like I was pretty ordinary, and then it wasn't until Jesus showing me how special I am, and really I think he does that for all of us when you hear his call, and when he's in your heart, that there's always been a plan. This wasn't by mistake. This wasn't, some accident. This wasn't like in all the times that you were lost, like he was there still, and just, like it's crazy, man. I used to say like I don't want to be a sheep, and it's like all I want to say now is I want to be a sheep, one
Yeah,
of
me
his
too.
sheep, because it's just like it's different when you think of it like that. There's already someone that did all the work, right? Jesus going on the cross and dying for all of us, like that's incredible, man. All the apostles that spreading the word after that, incredible. Like, and so yeah, man, it's been so good to talk to you. Like I said, I've been running back on the episodes, really, not to toot your horn too much, but like I've really just stuck to the bump lately because, like I said, everyone at least there, there's people starting their shows with prayers, ending the shows with prayers. There's people that understand that Jesus is King, and as much as all the other, supernatural, Bigfoot, conspiracy stuff is, if it's not rooted in Jesus, I like don't, I really don't have much space for that. But yeah, so I think you're doing a great job, man, like you say yourself, it's God using the show for, you know, so
His
that's
glory,
that's
buddy.
incredible. Yeah,
It's
His
his
glory,
glory.
exactly.
Uh, it's all about him. It's all about Jesus. And like
Amen.
you said, you're a steward of your son. He's letting me steward this show for as long as he wants me to. And the day he
Right.
says hang it up, I'll hang it up. But until then, it's all about Jesus, man. And I thank you for being a part of that, for letting me share your story.
Yeah, right on, brother. I'll be on the lookout for that new episode then, for sure.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Well, brother, is there anything else you want to cover before we hop off here for the night?
No, I think that's mostly it. Oh, I was expecting you to ask me what my favorite scripture verse was, so I have it
I
in
have it
my deck.
written down here to ask you, and I went ahead and just blocked off Psalm 23 in case we didn't get to it.
Uh,
But yeah, let me ask Carlos, what's your favorite scripture? What's your verse, man? Stitched to your heart. What do you got?
one that I think one that just I think about all the time, and I just always refer to it as, I don't think it's a common one, but it's Revelation 22:13, and Jesus says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." And I just, you know what I mean? Like the first time I read through Revelation, I even did like a Bible study after it because I was like, "What the heck did I just read?" I'm
Yeah,
I'm
dude, that's so
I'm reading
good.
the King James version, right? So, and it's cool because I have a bilingual Bible, so some of the it I can read the King James pretty well now because I can reference it in Spanish, and so it'll like translate a little easier. But uh, yeah, I think Jesus just is very clear in that verse, in that book, in that chapter. Like, hey, it just is, and always was, you know. And when you realize that the Bible is all a story leading up to Jesus, it's all about Jesus. Um, you know, that's he says it in Revelation 22:13. You know, he's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning, you know, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And I think about that in every aspect of my life, right? And that's what really made me think about when he had finally allowed me to see what this testimony was going to be and what the story was. It was a story from beginning to end, from the, you know, and there's still more to it, you know. But right now it's incredible, right? Because for the longest I just thought my life started when I was in 2023 when I proclaimed God and heard Jesus' voice, but really it's been before that. And hearing my parents' testimony and hearing what my mom did for me in the womb, like that's all part of it. You know what I mean? And so thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Bo. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carlos. Brother, you have a good night.
Yeah, you too, brother. Yeah,
And God
and
bless.
right on. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yes, Happy New Year.
Right on.
Later, man.